The envelope arrived without warning, tucked into a stack of ordinary papers on my desk like it had every right to be there. I remember the moment as clearly as I remember the sound of gunfire, the way silence follows after something breaks. My eyes landed on it and stayed, because even before I touched it, I knew it carried weight. Not just paper, not just ink, but something heavier, something meant to pull me back to a place I had spent years trying to forget. It was white, unnervingly pristine, its edges embossed in a pattern so delicate it almost mocked me. The name written across the front in looping script was mine, though it felt strange to see it. Tessa Vega. Not Captain Vega. Not Major Vega. Not Commander. Not any of the ranks I had bled to earn. Just the family name paired with my given one, as if the years of distance had been erased in a single stroke of a pen. The last time my mother had said my name aloud, she had laced it with so much disdain that I had sworn never to hear it again. Yet here it was, printed in black ink that seemed to sneer from the page. I did not open it right away. Instead, I let it sit in the pool of late afternoon light that spilled across my desk. My office was stark, the kind of place designed to keep a soldier disciplined. No personal photographs, no clutter, nothing that gave away the softer pieces of who I was. The bed in the corner was made with corners sharp enough to cut skin. The uniforms hanging neatly in the closet lined up like silent sentinels. My boots, polished and ready, waited by the door. Everything in that room spoke of order, control, and silence. And on the desk, that envelope did not belong. For almost an hour, I stared at it. I told myself I was simply tired from drills, that I had no energy to deal with whatever formality it contained. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I was afraid. Afraid of the familiar sting in my chest, the way one glance at my family's handwriting could make me feel like the same unwanted daughter who had once stood outside her own father's funeral because there was no seat for her. Finally, with hands steadier than I felt, I slid a finger beneath the seal and broke it. The sound was soft, but to me it was deafening. Inside, I expected only a generic card, maybe an announcement scrawled with hollow pleasantries. Instead, the contents glimmered with effort. Thick cardstock, elegant calligraphy, gold lettering that caught the light. "You are cordially invited," the words blurred for a moment. My sister, the one who had spent years treating me like an intruder in my own family, was getting married. To anyone else, this would have been nothing more than an occasion. To me, it was a battlefield dressed in lace. And the name written in bold below hers made the air leave my lungs. Alexander Ward. I remembered his face, not from parties or polite family introductions, but from a night in the desert when the air was filled with dust and blood. I remembered crawling across open ground to reach him after the blast, the way his breath rattled as he whispered that he owed me his life. I remembered the weight of his body as I dragged him out of fire. He had looked at me, then with gratitude so raw it seemed permanent. Now, he was marrying the woman who had spent her life ensuring I remained invisible. The irony cut deeper than shrapnel ever had. I set the card down, my mind swarming with images of the past. The battlefield, the hospital bed where he had clutched my hand, the last message I had received from him before silence took over, and then the years that followed where my sister's voice replaced his, telling anyone who would listen that I was the shame of the Vega bloodline. A knock broke through my spiraling thoughts. Sharp, deliberate, 2 quick raps that belonged to only one man. I did not answer. He came in anyway. Major Ruiz had known me since I was 20, since I had been a stubborn cadet with too much fire in her chest and not enough trust in her bones. He carried himself with the same steady patience he always had, a man who had seen me fail, rise, and bleed and still never judged. His eyes flicked immediately to the envelope on my desk. "I heard," he said simply. His voice was calm, but I knew him well enough to hear the unspoken question. I did not bother to deny it. "She is getting married," I said, my tone clipped, professional, though the words nearly broke something inside me. Ruiz stepped closer, picked up the invitation, and studied it with a frown. "Ward," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "That is the one you pulled out of the crater in Helmand, isn't it?" I nodded once. My throat felt tight. "You saved his life, and now he is marrying your sister." The way he said it made it sound like a betrayal carved into marble. My silence was answer enough. After a long moment, he asked the question I had been avoiding. "Are you going?" I did not answer right away. Instead, I let the weight of the invitation settle in my chest, pressing against old wounds I thought had healed. Finally, I said, "Do you think I should?" He studied me the way only someone who had watched you grow could. "Depends. Are you going to fight a war or bury a ghost?" I laughed then, though it came out hollow. "Maybe just to watch one burn." He did not smile. He rarely did when it mattered. "If you go," he said quietly. Do not wear your scars like armor. Wear them like memory. Let them see who you became without them. His words lingered long after he left. I sat at the desk, the invitation burning in front of me, and stared out the narrow window at the training field. Recruits shouted below, their voices young and eager, still untouched by betrayal. I envied them for their innocence, their belief that the only enemies were on the battlefield. They had not yet learned that sometimes the deepest cuts come from blood. The memory of my father's funeral came rushing back, uninvited. The Marine Corps band playing with solemn precision, the rifle salute cracking across the cemetery air, the folded flag handed to my mother's trembling hands. I had stood at the back, in uniform, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. My mother had not looked at me once. My sister had barely spared me a glance before turning away. And when the service ended, my mother had placed her hand on my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve, and whispered, "You should not have come in uniform. It makes it look like you are trying to upstage the family." The family, as if I was not part of it. That had been 6 years ago. 6 years of silence. And now, suddenly, an invitation to stand witness while the man who owed me his life became part of the family that had thrown me away. I opened my laptop. My fingers hesitated only once before typing in the search for flights. Richmond, Virginia, departure in 2 weeks, one stop in Frankfurt. I selected the quietest option, the red-eye flight that promised anonymity. Within 30 seconds, a confirmation email arrived. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. The invitation still lay open on the desk, its gold lettering shining faintly in the lamplight. I did not go to be welcomed. I went to be seen. I should have slept that night, but sleep was a stranger. I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, the lines of fluorescent light above me humming faintly like an old memory that refuses to fade. The envelope was still on the desk, the card inside it shining like a wound left open. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. My mother's sharp profile, her lips pressed into a line that cut deeper than any blade. My sister's easy smile, the one she wielded like a weapon. The two of them at dinner tables where I was always a shadow, at gatherings where I was introduced as the difficult one, the daughter who chose steel and dust over pearls and champagne. It was strange how memory worked. I could barely recall the sound of my father's laugh anymore, but I remembered with painful clarity the way my mother's voice dropped to a hiss when she told me I was ruining their image. I remembered Haley at 17, tilting her head with mock innocence when she told the neighbors that her older sister was just going through a phase, as if my ambition were nothing more than a rebellious haircut. I rolled over and stared at the clock on the wall. 2:14. Time had a way of mocking you when you wanted it to move faster. My hand brushed against the dog tags resting on the nightstand. The metal was cold, a comfort I did not deserve but still reached for. My name stamped into steel. My rank earned, not given. Proof that I was more than the disappointment printed in the margins of my family's stories. The next morning came early, as it always did. I dressed in silence, boots laced tight, uniform pressed, every detail precise. Discipline had been my salvation. It was easier to focus on order than on the chaos of blood ties. The field outside was alive with shouts of recruits, their voices blending with the sharp bark of a drill sergeant. I stood by the window for a long time, watching them run, their movements clumsy but determined. I envied them, not for their youth but for their belief that loyalty was simple. When I finally left my quarters, the base was humming with its usual rhythm. Engines roaring from the motor pool, radios crackling with clipped instructions, boots pounding against pavement in practice synchronization. Life here was predictable, measurable, nothing like the invitation waiting for me. I carried it in my pocket that day, tucked into my jacket as if hiding it would make it less real. But every time I reached for my pen or folded my arms, I felt the sharp edge of the card pressing against me. A reminder, a demand. Ruiz caught up with me outside the mess hall. His stride was casual, but I could see the way his eyes searched my face, looking for cracks. He had always been too good at reading me. "You did not sleep," he said, not a question. I shook my head. "I booked the flight." He nodded once, unsurprised. "Of course you did." We ate in silence, though the clatter of trays and the low hum of conversation filled the space around us. Across the room, young soldiers laughed over stories I could not hear, their voices carefree in a way mine had never been. I envied them and pitied them at once. They had not yet learned how heavy betrayal could feel. After breakfast, drills stretched into the afternoon. I moved through each command like clockwork, my body obeying without hesitation, but my mind elsewhere. I thought of the church where the wedding would take place, though I had never seen it. I imagined white flowers, polished wood, sunlight filtered through stained glass. And in the middle of it, my sister, radiant in a dress designed to erase every shadow of her cruelty. Would she smile when she saw me? Would she even acknowledge my presence? Or would she pretend, as always, that I was invisible? That evening, alone again in my quarters, I opened the small trunk at the foot of my bed. Inside lay the uniform I had not touched in years. Dress blues, carefully folded, metals pinned with precision, fabric carrying the scent of ceremonies and funerals. My fingers traced the edge of a ribbon, remembering the night I had earned it. Not the explosion itself, not the chaos, but the silence that followed, the sound of my own breath as I realized I was still alive when so many others were not. I pulled the uniform out and laid it on the bed. The sight of it was both comfort and curse. It reminded me of who I was, but also of what I had lost. My mind drifted back to Alexander Ward. I saw him lying in the dirt, his leg torn open, his eyes wild with fear. I remembered crawling toward him, elbows scraping against gravel, every nerve in my body screaming. I remembered the moment I disarmed the mine, the click of it shifting from death to silence. He had looked at me then with eyes full of gratitude, whispering words I could still hear even now. I owe you. And now he would stand beside my sister, exchanging vows under soft lights, while I sat in the shadows, erased. The thought made my chest tight until I could barely breathe. 2 weeks passed like a blur. Training, briefings, paperwork, all of it mechanical, all of it background noise to the storm inside me. The closer the date came, the heavier the invitation felt in my pocket. I carried it with me everywhere, as if letting it go would mean surrendering to their silence once again. The night before my flight, I sat at my desk, the laptop open in front of me, the confirmation email glowing on the screen. Departure at 22:45. Arrival in Virginia the following morning. One stop in Frankfurt. Seat 3C. I had paid extra for the empty seat beside me. I needed the space. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. What was I doing? Walking into a house that had never welcomed me, a celebration where my presence would be seen as a blemish, a scar. I could almost hear my mother's voice telling me not to ruin things, not to draw attention, not to exist too loudly. But beneath that fear was something stronger. A need I could not bury. I wanted them to see me. Not as the failure they had painted me, not as the daughter erased from family photographs, but as the woman I had become. I closed the laptop, stood, and looked at the uniform lying neatly on the bed. I smoothed the sleeves with my palms, the fabric stiff under my touch. For the first time in years, I felt ready to wear it again, not as armor but as proof. When the morning came, I carried only a single bag. Civilian clothes for the flight, the uniform folded carefully inside. I left my quarters without a word, without a farewell. The air was cool, the sky streaked with the first hints of dawn. As the car pulled away from the base, I did not look back. The world outside the window blurred into shades of gray and green, towns slipping past, roads winding toward a destination I both dreaded and demanded. My chest was heavy, but my spine was straight. I was going home, though it had never felt like home. Not to be welcomed, not to be forgiven, but to be seen. The airport was already crowded when I arrived, a current of people moving in practiced waves, each with their own destination, their own urgency. Rolling suitcases rattled against the polished floors, voices overlapped in a dozen languages, announcements echoed from speakers overhead. I had always liked airports for one reason: anonymity. No one cared who you were as long as your documents were in order. For someone like me, that had always been a relief. But this time, anonymity was not enough. This time, I carried something heavier than my duffel bag. I carried history. Security was quick. My military ID cleared the line with ease, the officer glancing once at the card before waving me through. I wondered if he noticed the way my shoulders stiffened when he read my name, if he guessed that it carried a story too complicated to fit on that small rectangle of plastic. At the gate, I settled into a seat near the window. Outside, the plane waited, its silver body gleaming under artificial lights. I watched ground crew move with precise coordination, loading luggage, checking equipment. Everything about it reminded me of the military, the same efficiency, the same rhythm of people who knew their roles. The boarding call came, and I stood, my steps steady, though inside my chest a storm was gathering. When I reached my seat, 3C, aisle, I saw that the space beside me was empty. I had paid for that emptiness, and in that moment it felt worth every dollar. I needed the silence. I needed the space to think. As the plane lifted off, the city lights spread beneath us like a constellation scattered across the dark. I pressed my forehead against the window, the vibration humming through my bones. Somewhere below, people were going about their lives, unaware that a woman was flying home to confront ghosts she had buried long ago. The flight attendant paused at my row. She noticed the ribbons on my jacket before I could tuck them away. "Champagne, ma'am," she offered, her smile polite, professional. "Water," I said. My voice came out flatter than I intended. She nodded, poured the glass, and moved on. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to shut out the world. Sleep never came easily to me, not after everything I had seen, everything I had carried. My mind played back the battlefield in sharp fragments. The smell of burned metal, the roar of explosions, the taste of blood in my mouth as I dragged Alexander through the dirt. His voice whispering, "I owe you," just before he lost consciousness. Now he was marrying my sister. The thought was almost absurd, like something from a poorly written play. And yet it was real, stamped into the invitation that still lay in my bag. Hours passed in silence. Occasionally, I opened my eyes to glance at the map glowing on the small screen ahead of me. The dotted lines stretched across the Atlantic, each passing mile a reminder that I was getting closer. Closer to the house I had left behind. Closer to the mother who had perfected the art of pretending I did not exist. Closer to the sister who would stand in white silk while I sat in shadows. At some point, exhaustion overtook me. Not true sleep, but the shallow drift of someone whose body insists on rest while the mind remains awake. In that half-dream, I was back at my father's funeral. The sound of rifles cracking through the air, the folded flag passed into hands that trembled with both pride and sorrow. And me, standing apart, my uniform pressed, my eyes burning, waiting for a seat that never came. My mother's words whispering like venom in my ear. "You should not have come. You make it look like you are trying to upstage us." Even in dreams, the sting returned. The announcement jolted me awake. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing in approximately 20 minutes. I sat upright, my hands gripping the armrests. My chest tightened as the ground grew closer, the familiar outlines of Virginia spreading beneath us. Roads weaving like veins, houses dotted across the landscape, rivers cutting through forests. Home, though the word had always felt wrong on my tongue. When the plane touched down, the cabin filled with the usual shuffle of passengers gathering their belongings, stretching limbs, murmuring to one another. I remained seated, waiting for the aisle to clear. My bag rested at my feet, heavier than it should have been. The terminal smelled of coffee and disinfectant, the kind of scent that clung to every airport in the world. I moved quickly through customs, my ID once again smoothing the way. Then, as I stepped into the arrivals hall, my phone vibrated. An unknown number flashed across the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but curiosity won. I pressed answer. Well, a voice drawled, sweet with an edge of steel. "You actually came." My chest tightened. Haley, her voice had not changed. Still that lilting sweetness that could make even an insult sound like a compliment. Still the tone she had used when we were children, and she told teachers I was going through a phase, as if my existence required an explanation. "I did not say I was coming to celebrate," I replied, my voice even. "You did not say anything for 6 years," she countered brightly. "So this is progress." I could hear her smile through the phone, the same smile she had used at school dances, at family dinners, whenever she wanted to appear innocent while cutting me down. "I came because I was invited," I said flatly. "Right," she said, "because Mom guilted you into it." I did not answer. "Well," she chirped after a pause, "Alexander is looking forward to seeing you. You two always had chemistry." I stopped mid-step on the moving walkway. My stomach turned cold. "That is not funny." "I did not mean it to be," she said, but I heard the smile anyway. I ended the call without replying. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I slipped it back into my pocket. Around me, the airport hummed with life. Families reunited in embraces, businessmen hurried toward taxis, children clutched stuffed animals as they were pulled along by tired parents. For them, this was routine. For me, it was the beginning of something I could not yet name. Outside, Virginia was blooming in early spring. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, their petals drifting like confetti. The drive from the airport cut through neighborhoods that looked like postcards, every lawn trimmed, every sidewalk swept. Too perfect, too polished, too carefully curated. I leaned back in the seat of the car, my duffel resting beside me, and closed my eyes. I was not ready, but I was already here, and there was no turning back. The neighborhood unfolded like a memory I never asked for. Streets lined with trees in bloom, houses too polished, their shutters freshly painted, driveways swept clean of even a leaf out of place. Each detail whispered perfection, but it was the kind of perfection that suffocates, the kind that hides its cracks behind gleaming surfaces. The car slowed as it turned into the cul-de-sac I had once called home. I knew the house immediately, though time had passed. It stood at the center like a sentinel, its white walls gleaming, its windows reflecting the morning light. Too pristine, too staged, like a photograph in a magazine. Nothing about it had changed, and yet it felt foreign, as though it belonged to a family that had erased me long ago. As I stepped out, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and freshly cut grass. My duffel strap bit into my shoulder. I adjusted it, squaring my stance. I was not walking into enemy territory, not exactly, but my body could not tell the difference. Across the street, Mrs. Langford was bent over her hydrangeas, trimming them with the same obsessive care I remembered from my childhood. Her eyes lifted when she saw me. They widened, then narrowed in that familiar way of hers, sharp with curiosity. "Tessa," she called, her voice carrying across the yard. "Well, my goodness, you are still in the military." I forced a smile, polite but without warmth. "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze lingered on my uniform jacket, her eyes tracing the bars, the medals. She tilted her head as if deciding whether to offer praise or pity. "I thought maybe you had left after everything." "Some of us stay," I thought. Aloud, I only said, "Some of us stay." I walked past her before she could press further. My boots crunched against the pavement, every step bringing me closer to the front door. The house loomed taller with each pace. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. For a heartbeat, I let myself hope the door would remain closed, that I could leave and claim I had tried. But then footsteps sounded from within, and the door opened. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Lemon polish, sharp and overwhelming, the signature of my mother. Every surface inside gleamed with disapproval. The hallway stretched before me, lined with photographs in golden frames. Family portraits smiled down at me, frozen moments of a family that had chosen to edit me out. Haley in her prom dress. My parents on their anniversary. Cousins, uncles, friends. My face appeared only once, in a photo so old it might as well have belonged to another life. Barbara Vega stood there in the doorway, wearing beige slacks and a blouse pressed to perfection. Her hair, pulled back in a bun, was streaked with silver but arranged with military precision. Her eyes swept over me, lingering on the uniform, her lips pressed together. "Please," she said finally, "do not ruin this for Haley." The words were not a greeting. They were a warning. I stepped inside, the duffel heavy against my shoulder, and the familiar weight of silence pressed down on me. The dining room was visible through the archway. It looked exactly as I remembered. The chandelier glittering, the mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, the china set as if for royalty. 15 seats arranged with mathematical precision, each place card positioned carefully. 14 people already sat around it, their voices a low hum of conversation. Only one chair remained empty, tucked near the sideboard, far from the center, far from visibility. Of course, it was mine. I lingered for a moment in the archway, letting the scene wash over me. My mother moved between the table and the sideboard, adjusting napkins, checking glasses. Haley sat radiant already, her silk blouse catching the light as she laughed too loudly at something a cousin had said. She glowed, as if the entire room existed to reflect her. I drew a breath and stepped forward. The chair creaked when I pulled it out. The sound turned heads for an instant, then turned away just as quickly. Haley raised her glass. "To family," she declared. "To new beginnings," my mother added, her glance flicking toward me like the strike of a match. "To Alexander and the bride-to-be," my uncle chimed in, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never been ignored. Not a word about me. Not a mention that I had crossed an ocean to sit at this table. No acknowledgement of my presence, my rank, my sacrifice, just silence, polished and deliberate. I lifted my water glass and drank. The wine had not reached me yet, and I wondered if it ever would. Across the table, a man in uniform furrowed his brow as he studied me. "You look familiar," he said, half to himself. Before I could answer, my mother leaned in smoothly. "Oh, this is Tessa. She has been stationed overseas doing security work." The words hit like a slap. Security work. As if commanding brigades, surviving battlefields, carrying the lives of men and women on my shoulders could be reduced to guarding doors. "She guards doors," Haley clarified with a smile, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Important ones, I am sure." A ripple of laughter spread down the table. It did not reach me. I let my gaze fall to the silverware laid neatly before me. A salad fork, a dessert spoon, a knife too dull to cut anything but soft meat. Tools arranged for civility but sharp enough for pretense. Silence pressed around me, not the silence of peace but the silence that follows a command. It was a silence I had lived in all my life. The server finally arrived with the wine. He filled glass after glass, his hands steady, his smile polite. When he reached me, he hesitated, glanced at his list, and shook his head. "Non-drinking guest," he murmured, moving on. I did not correct him. Haley turned toward me then, her eyes glinting with the thrill of performance. "So, how long are you here for, Tessa? Or are you on call to guard a missile silo or something?" Her smirk sent another ripple of amusement down the table. I raised my glass, took a sip, and set it down deliberately. My voice was calm when I answered. "The people I guard outrank this entire room." The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter. For the first time that evening, they did not know where to place me. And that terrified them. The dinner continued, but to me it felt less like a meal and more like a slow trial, each course another opportunity to measure how little space I occupied in this house. Forks scraped softly against porcelain. Glasses clinked politely. The laughter was practiced, controlled as if every sound had been rehearsed. I watched my mother glide from seat to seat, topping off wine glasses, adjusting silverware. She did not look at me again, not directly. I could have been a ghost at the table, and maybe that was exactly how she wanted it. Haley was radiant, of course. She always had a talent for filling a room with her presence. She leaned in close to cousins, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, touched her fiancé's arm in a way that was more possession than affection. Alexander smiled at her, the perfect groom, but every so often his eyes flicked across the table, landing on me for a fraction of a second before darting away. Each glance was quick, but I caught everyone. The others noticed too. I could tell by the way conversation shifted when his eyes strayed. A cousin cleared his throat too loudly. An aunt asked about honeymoon plans with forced brightness. The whole table moved like a machine trying to cover a misfiring gear. I let them. Instead, I studied the walls. They were lined with photographs I had not seen in years. Haley in a graduation gown, Haley at a dance, Haley with my mother smiling beside her. Even my father appeared in some of them, his arm around my sister, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder. My own face was missing, as if I had been erased not only from their present but from their history. The only photograph of me hung near the back wall, nearly hidden by a decorative lamp. I was young in it, maybe 12, hair pulled back too tightly, a stiff smile stretched across my face. My mother's hand was on my shoulder, her fingers digging in just enough to look affectionate to a stranger. I remembered the day it was taken. I remembered the warning she whispered just before the flash. "Don't ruin this, smile." I pushed the memory aside and reached for my water. "You must find it so different here," one of my uncles said suddenly, his tone falsely polite. After all that military business. The military business. As though deployments, firefights, the lives I carried in my hands could be summed up with those words. "It is different," I said simply. I let the words hang, sharp and unfinished. The uncle shifted uncomfortably, then smiled too quickly. "Well, it is good you could make it back. Haley insisted you be invited." That lie was almost elegant in its delivery. Haley beamed, playing along as if she had extended a hand to me across the years. I said nothing. The meal stretched on. Plates were cleared, new ones appeared. I hardly tasted the food. My stomach was too tight, my body too aware of every stare, every silence. Halfway through, Alexander stood. He raised his glass, his smile smooth, and gave a toast about family, about loyalty, about new chapters. His voice was steady, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten when he said the word loyalty. When the toast ended, everyone clapped. Everyone except me. My hand stayed still on the table. Alexander's eyes met mine for the briefest moment, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us before he sat back down. I exhaled slowly, the air heavy in my lungs. Later, when the plates were cleared and the family moved into the sitting room for dessert and coffee, I slipped away. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. That was the advantage of being invisible, you could vanish without notice. I climbed the stairs quietly, my boots sinking into the thick carpet. The hallway stretched long, lined with closed doors. Each one carried a memory. My old bedroom, now likely a storage space. Haley's room, once a shrine to trophies and pageants. The guest room where relatives stayed during holidays I was rarely invited to. I paused outside my own door. The brass knob was polished, gleaming under the hall light. For a moment, I wondered if they had stripped the room of everything that once belonged to me. I wondered if it had been painted over, redecorated, erased completely. When I pushed it open, the air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something old, like pages of a book left too long untouched. The room was smaller than I remembered. The bed was gone, replaced by stacked boxes. The walls were bare except for faint outlines where posters once hung. A desk sat in the corner, its surface empty, though I remembered writing there late at night, my pen scratching against paper as I dreamed of leaving this place behind. One box was open and I crouched beside it. Inside were fragments of me. Old notebooks, worn at the edges. A medal from a high school track meet. A faded photograph of me in uniform, the corners bent as if it had been tossed carelessly inside. I picked up the photo. My younger self stared back at me, proud, defiant, still believing she could earn their respect if she tried hard enough. My throat tightened. That girl had no idea what was coming. A voice behind me made me stiffen. "You should not be in here." I turned. My mother stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression sharp. "This is still my room," I said quietly. "It was your room," she corrected. Her eyes flicked to the box in my hands. "We kept those things because it felt wrong to throw them away, but they are not part of this house anymore." I set the photograph down carefully as if it were fragile. "Neither am I, apparently." Her mouth tightened, but she said nothing. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy with everything neither of us wanted to say. Finally, she stepped back, her voice cool. "Dessert is being served. Try not to cause a scene." She disappeared before I could answer. I sat there for a long time, surrounded by pieces of a past I no longer recognized. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the box. The walls seemed to press in on me, the weight of years of silence suffocating. When I finally rose, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the desk. My face looked older, harder. My uniform still sharp, but my eyes tired. For a moment, I wondered if this house could make me small again, if it could undo everything I had built outside of it. Then I squared my shoulders. No, I was not the girl in the photo anymore. I returned downstairs when the clink of china and the faint scent of burnt sugar drifted up the staircase. The house was louder now, not with joy, but with effort. Conversations overlapped in the way people speak when they are afraid to leave silence in the room. I moved through the hallway slowly, my hand grazing the smooth rail, the wood polished to a shine that reflected a warped ribbon of light. In the sitting room, dessert had been arranged on a long sideboard as if it were an exhibit. Lemon tart cut into neat triangles, a glossy chocolate cake that held the light like a mirror, a bowl of strawberries glistening as though they had been lacquered. My mother stood beside the spread with the cold grace of a curator. When she noticed me, her expression did not change, but I saw the small adjustments, the tiny calibrations of someone who believes her face is a surface to be managed. I poured coffee for myself to avoid the charade of being served. The cup warmed my hands, the heat steady against my palms. This room had once held winter fires. Now it held only expensive lamps that washed the furniture in gold. The portraits above the mantel smiled down at us, a lineage of curated moments. The only picture that had included me had been moved to the hallway years ago. I almost laughed. Of course it had. Haley swanned through the doorway a moment later, gathering eyes like a seam gathers fabric. Even without a wedding dress, she managed to glow. The silk blouse, the jewelry that looked accidental but had been chosen with surgical intention, the hair styled to look effortless. She kissed cheeks. She called people darling. She did not look at me, and because she did not, the room did. Alexander followed a few steps behind her. He wore a suit that fit too well to have been bought without thought. The scar at his jaw was just visible when he turned his head. That scar, I knew, was not mine. I had been with him earlier in his story. It was strange to be one chapter among many, and to be the chapter no one here would ever read. He saw me near the window, and did what polite men do. He approached as though closing the distance were an act of kindness. "Tessa," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded careful. "I am glad you made it here safely." "Planes still land," I said. His eyes flicked to the coffee in my hand, then back to my face. "I wanted to thank you for coming." "You wanted to thank me for something," I said. "The sentence after that is the one I am waiting for." He inhaled. The muscles along his cheek tightened. "I owe you a debt." "You said that once," I replied, "but you said it with mud in your mouth and a helicopter overhead." I believed it then. I do not know what to do with it here in a room that smells like lemon and sugar. A cluster of relatives drifted close, orbiting the conversation without entering it. Alexander lowered his voice, the way men lower their voices when they are trying to hide sincerity inside a sentence. "I do not expect you to forgive the past or to accept the present," he murmured. "I only wanted to say that I see you." I considered him. Truth has a way of making even soft voices heavy. "Seeing me is not the same as standing next to me," I said, "but it is also not nothing." He nodded as if the motion itself could hold a line steady. Before he could answer, Haley arrived at his elbow, her hand feathering his sleeve with the delicacy of habit. "There you are," she said, to him, not to me. Only then did she tip her head, her smile a blade wrapped in silk. "Sister." I took a sip of coffee to give my hands something to do. "Haley." She looked past me toward the window, as if something outside had become suddenly interesting. Perhaps the glass was just enough of a mirror. "We have a rehearsal to keep on time. You will be where you are seated. Do not wander. The coordinator is quite particular." My mother drifted near with a plate of tart balanced on fingers that never shook. "Yes," she added, eyes on the plate, voice clean. "Please do not improvise. It confuses people." I set my cup on the mantel with a care I reserve for unstable things. "I will do exactly what is expected," I said, and even I could hear the lie it almost was. Through the living room doors, the officiant waited with a clipboard, a man paid to make perfection look like patience. People began to gather. Chairs had been arranged in tidy rows on the lawn. The afternoon light carried the kind of glow that makes people think good things are inevitable. I took the aisle seat assigned to me, far from the center but still within the lines of a photograph. A cousin leaned forward to whisper to an aunt. An uncle joked about parking. The violinist tuned her instrument with quick, apologetic strokes as if sound itself were a mess she needed to clean. The rehearsal flowed as rehearsals do, with corrections and with the polite endurance of people who prefer finishing to caring. Haley practiced her steps as if grace could be measured. Alexander stood where he was told and looked like a picture. The coordinator gave directions in a voice that sounded like pastel ribbon looks. I watched the angle of the light on the back of Haley's neck, the place where pearls touched skin. I watched my mother's posture as she sat in the front row, a spine that could have been used to draw a blueprint. Sometimes cruelty is not a word, it is simply an arrangement. When it was over, guests drifted inside for the last round of coffee and the performance of small talk that fills space where love should be. I stayed on the edge of the lawn to avoid being spoken at. The grass under my shoes was soft, the kind of expensive sod that never knows drought. The hydrangeas across the way held their impossible blues like tiny skies. "Do you remember the summer we convinced Dad to build a swing in the oak tree?" A voice asked behind me. It was a question made of dust. I turned. Haley stood there alone, holding nothing, which was unusual for her. She was not good at empty hands. "I remember the summer he did not," I said. Her smile faltered for the briefest second. "He would have," she said, "if you had not been so consumed." "It is interesting," I replied, "that you remember my seriousness as the thing that broke this house, and not the silence that followed it." The wind lifted a strand of her hair. She tucked it behind her ear in a gesture designed to look human. "Tomorrow matters," she said. "Do not take the attention away from where it belongs." I looked up at the oak tree. The branches were carefully trimmed into tidiness. "Do you think I could take anything from you now?" I asked, "that you have not already taken from me?" Her throat moved with a swallow she did not give permission to show. There was an old habit in her face then, a flash of the girl who had learned to weaponize doubt. "You were always dramatic, Tess." I almost laughed at the nickname. It was the name she used for public tenderness, reserved for witnesses and for winning. "You were always curating the truth, Hales," I said softly. "Some of us learned to carry it instead." She did not answer. The silence that followed did not belong to either of us. It belonged to the years. Inside, the family gathered around the sitting room again. Someone produced a box of keepsakes from a cabinet I had never been allowed to open. There were ticket stubs from ballets, programs from recitals, postcards from beaches where the sand looked almost purchased. My mother lifted each item with a smile that suggested history is only the parts you choose to touch. A slip of paper fell free and drifted to the rug near my shoe. I bent to pick it up. It was a place card, heavy stock, embossed in gold. One word on it, centered like a verdict: bride. I placed it on the table and stepped back, suddenly aware of the way the room seemed to tilt around that single idea. All of this, all of them. Every gesture had been assembled to orbit one identity. There was a time when I might have wanted that orbit for myself. Not the wedding, not the dress, but the gravity. The quiet, unremarkable gravity of belonging. That time had passed. What remained was the clarity that comes after smoke. We dispersed early under the pretense of rest. The house dimmed its lamps until only hall lights remained, a corridor glow that made doors look like thin decisions. Upstairs, the bathroom mirror did what mirrors do at night. It reflected a face that looked tired without asking why. I washed my hands longer than I needed to. Rituals persist because they fill a space timing cannot. In my room, I opened my duffel and took out the dress uniform. The fabric was heavier than memory. I laid it on the chair and smoothed a sleeve with my palm. The metals were a small constellation, each one made of its own weather. People like to call medals proof. I never did. To me, they were the catalog of moments where choice met chaos. I pinned the collar and stopped when the medal caught the light. It flickered. In that flicker, I saw a night sky broken by fire, a field turned to shards, a man calling my name through grit. I saw my own hands pull him from an outline the dirt was already drawing. I did not see myself as a hero. I saw myself as a person who refused to stand still. A soft knock at the door interrupted the past. Not sharp, not emphatic, a human knock. When I opened it, Alexander stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets like an apology. "You should not be up here," I said. "I know," he replied. He kept his voice low so the house could pretend not to hear us. I wanted to say something without an audience. He glanced past my shoulder at the uniform on the chair. I did not invite him in. The hallway was better, the threshold made sense. "I will not make tomorrow harder," he said. "For you, if I can help it." "I do not need your help," I answered. "I need your accuracy." He nodded once. "I can give you that." We stood in the kind of quiet that happens when both people have already spoken the worst versions of their truths somewhere else. He looked older in this light, not because of lines, but because the eyes that watched a person die and live in the same minute never go back to preface. "Do you love her?" I asked. I did not ask to wound him. I asked because questions make better ghosts when they have answers. "I wanted something simple," he said, and it was the most honest sentence I had heard in this house. She looked like simple when I was tired. The admission did not please me. It did not anger me. It simply set the furniture in the room of the mind where it belonged. "You will have to carry that," I said. "I already do," he answered. Then he straightened, as though the conversation itself had weight and he was shifting his back under it. "Good night, Tessa." "Good night," I said, and closed the door before the house could memorize the moment. I turned off the lamp and let the dark hold the edges of the furniture. The uniform waited in the chair like a decision I had already made. I lay down without undressing, as if my body could not trust the room enough to get comfortable. Sleep came in pieces. When it did, it brought with it the old dreams where sound turns to dust and time becomes a hand on your throat. Morning arrived without ceremony. The house woke the way disciplined houses do, quietly, with tasks. Somewhere downstairs a kettle sang. Footsteps crossed the kitchen tile with metronome precision. A delivery van hissed to a stop outside, then breathed away. I sat up and watched the light make a thin ladder on the wall. The dress uniform fit exactly as it always had, which is to say it fit around the parts of me that did not shift with seasons. I pinned the last piece and stood in front of the mirror. People talk about armor as if it is something you put on. What I wore had never been armor. It was simply a language other people chose to translate as threat. I descended the stairs and felt the first eyes find me. Haley appeared from the dining room in a robe that had more dignity than some people's wedding gowns. My mother trailed her with a garment bag, its zipper pulled up like a breath held too long. Both stopped when they saw me. Their silence did not surprise me. Their stillness did. "You cannot wear that," my mother said after a moment, each word carefully spaced. "It will distract." "It will clarify," I replied. Haley recovered first. She smiled. "Of course you would make it about you." "I make nothing about me," I said. "I bring what is already mine." The front door opened on a gust of cool air and voices. The coordinator swept in with 2 assistants. A photographer followed close, already lifting his camera, hungry for the pretty. The house brightened its face and moved. Time began to narrow. Makeup artists took over a corner of the living room. Florists adjusted arrangements that were already arranged. The officiant checked his notes. Guests started to arrive in their polite colors. An aunt reached for my elbow and missed when I stepped away. I stood by a window and watched the yard gather chairs. A small white tent had been added overnight near the patio in case of weather, though the sky held steady. The oak presented itself as a benevolent witness. The hydrangeas rehearsed their silence. When the call came to line up for the processional rehearsal, I moved where the coordinator pointed and smiled with my eyes closed. The mechanics of ceremony do not interest me. What interested me always was the moment when mechanics fail and truth enters a room like a draft. The rehearsal ended. The real thing began sooner than anyone was ready for, as real things do. Guests took their places. The string quartet shifted from warm-up to something polished. The air carried a sweetness that did not belong to anything alive. I could feel the house holding its breath. The family settled into their assigned significance. Haley stood at the bottom of the stairs with her hand on the banister, a tableau designed to be remembered. Alexander waited at the end of the aisle with the efficient, golden light turning his suit into a second skin. The coordinator lifted her hand. The room fell into the hush that falls just before performance. I stepped into the column of sunlight cutting the floor, and for the first time since I had arrived, I noticed that I did not feel small. Out on the lawn, the first notes lifted and kept lifting. I found my seat without looking, the way you find a habit without thinking. Guests watched the aisle with the intimacy that strangers reserve for spectacle. My mother glanced back once. Our eyes met. Hers held a question I had never seen there before, as if she were not entirely sure what play we were in. It would be night before the answer revealed itself. That belonged to another part of this story. For now, the House of Distance did what it had been trained to do. It performed. I curled my fingers beneath the edge of the chair and allowed myself one small, private truth. I had not returned for forgiveness. I had not come for apology. I had come to hold still in the exact center of who I was so that when the room rearranged itself, it would have to do it around me. The quartet reached the measure that signaled the first step. Haley began to move. Heads turned. The world tightened. Somewhere deep in the oak, a branch creaked like a warning. Or a welcome. Sometimes you cannot tell the difference until after. I drew a slow breath and tasted lemon polish and cut grass and the faint copper memory of a night where a man lived. The chair beneath me was a place. The uniform on my body was a fact. The rest was a script I had not written. And yet, if the past had taught me anything, it was this. Scripts look solid until someone speaks a line no one expects. I sat very still and waited for that line to arrive. The house woke like a theater on opening day. Doors clicked, voices softened at the ends of sentences, drawers shut with the care people use when they are pretending not to be afraid. By noon, the yard had turned into a brochure. An arch of white flowers, chairs in obedient rows, a quartet rehearsing a melody that wanted the air to forget weather and time. I took my assigned place because I am good at following orders when it suits me. The card said T. Vega in a font that tried not to take up space. Guests rose with the music. Haley appeared at the top of the steps, and for a breath the world agreed with her. The dress caught the light. The crowd made the sound people make when they are ready to love a story they can repeat later. The officiant was a gentle man built for photographs. He spoke about patience. He spoke about companions who steady each other across years. When he invited close family to come forward for a blessing, the front row rose as one body. I took a half step and felt a fingertip touch my sleeve. Not a tug, not a grip. A touch that said, "Do not." I sat. I watched the circle close without me as if I were air. Vows were exchanged, the rings slid home. The applause felt practiced, but relief is still relief even when it has been rehearsed. They kissed. Cameras clicked. The quartet made a soft turn into triumph. The oak tree above us creaked like an old witness clearing its throat. At the reception tent, a brass easel held the seating chart like law. Names bloomed in loops of gold. I scanned once, then twice, then found mine in the bottom corner. Table 12 near the service door. The ink might as well have said out of sight. I almost smiled. It is strange how a house can repeat itself even when it tries to change outfits. Inside, the room gleamed. Candles were given the job of making the expensive things look inevitable. I took my seat. A man in a navy blazer asked if I worked for the venue. I told him I guarded thresholds. He said that must be interesting and turned to ask someone else about the cake. The server skipped my wine with a note on his card. Non-drinking guest. I let the error stand. There are days when permission tastes better than correction. Across the tent, Haley moved like a swan that had studied mirrors for years. She kissed cheeks. She warmed hands with her voice. Alexander kept a palm at her back to steady the parade. Every few minutes his eyes found me. Not long, enough. Like a compass that checks north to be sure the map is still true. The first course slid onto tables. My plate arrived different from the others with a quick apology. We ran out of salmon. I said I had made peace with land long ago. The server smiled for real and moved on. It surprised me how much I wanted a human face in a room full of performances. The band softened to a hush. The coordinator touched the microphone as if it could bruise. Toasts began. My uncle told a story that meant nothing except that he knew how to make it sound like something. A friend of the groom trembled through a memory of dust and fear and ended with the word loyalty. The room loved him because the room loves risk told safely. Then Haley took the microphone and the air turned bright. She thanked the planner, thanked the florist, thanked the magic of Tuesdays. Heads tilted, smiles lifted. She looked happy in a way that is only possible when the floor has held you all your life. She turned to my side of the room with a glow I had seen 1,000 times and still found new ways to dislike. "Even my big sister made it here tonight," she said. all the way from wherever she is stationed now. It must be hard to get time off when you are on door duty." The joke slid across the tent like a silver knife. Laughter followed, quick and eager. A second later, a few people realized what they had swallowed and tried to chew it again. My mother laughed with her eyes shut. The retired officer beside her did not. He stared at me as if I had become a different noun. I set my glass down. The linen felt like paper that had been taught to fear wrinkles. I rose, not fast, not slow. The kind of rise a body learns in rooms where standing up has consequences and meaning. The band held its breath with everyone else. A fork fell 2 tables over and sang a small metal note. The photographer lifted his camera and then kept it lowered. Sometimes a lens knows when it is not invited. I did not ask for the microphone. I did not announce myself. I stood and let the shape of the night change around me. People think sound is the signal of change. It is often the pause. Alexander moved first. He set his glass down without a tremor. He walked from the head table as if the rug under him had turned into road. The crowd parted without being asked. He stopped 1 pace from me. He was close enough for me to count the line of a scar along his jaw. He was far enough to keep the past from making a mistake. He raised his hand to his brow and gave a salute that belonged to no camera and to every memory I owned. The room made a sound I had only ever heard after explosions. Not scream, not shout. A human inhale that forgets how to end. A candle guttered. A server froze with a tray balanced between what was allowed and what was true. Alexander held the salute long enough for the room to understand that this was not apology and not theater. When he lowered his hand, he spoke so that the back tables would not be spared. "Ma'am," he said, "please forgive my wife." The sentence rearranged furniture I could not see. He turned to the room. He did not list medals. He did not recite rank. He pointed at the truth and let it be the only large thing in the tent. "This is Tessa Vega," he said. "If you need a measure, measure what she carried when I could not stand." He stepped back, not away. The space between us felt like a line that had been drawn with a steady hand. In the corner near the bar, a woman stood and gave a salute that was imperfect and perfect at once. A man rose beside the wine, then another near the band, then a fourth near the door, until it became clear that recognition spreads the way flame does when it finally finds oxygen. Haley sagged into her chair and did not reach for the mic. My mother pressed 2 fingers to her pearls as if counting. The officer by her side came to attention without a word. The band leader put his hands on the keys and did not play. The photographer lifted the camera and took 1 clean frame and lowered it again like a prayer. I did not bow. I did not smile. I accepted what was already mine. That is all. The tent learned how to breathe again in pieces. Voices returned, this time a shade lower. The candles steadied. Someone touched my shoulder and then thought better of it. The coordinator set her clipboard on a chair and watched the room like a person who had just been told that a plan is only a suggestion. Alexander looked at me with more years on his face than the morning had given him. He said only 1 more sentence. "Thank you." He did not say for what. He left the space open so the room could find its own place inside it. He returned to the head table and did not touch the microphone. Haley did not lift it either. Sometimes silence is the only way to tell the truth without breaking it. I sat. I drank water that tasted like something I had earned. The retired officer walked over from the front row and gave me a nod that did not ask for anything in return. A child asked her mother if the story had heroes. The mother said yes and did not point. Music returned, but it did not pretend to be wallpaper. People spoke to me the way people speak when they are trying to correct something the past has already written in ink. Some stopped at my table and offered a sentence that felt like a hand. Others looked from across the room and let respect be quiet. My mother stayed seated longer than anyone. When she stood, she did it like a person who had suddenly remembered her own weight. Haley left the tent through a side flap and did not look behind her. No one followed. Some corridors belonged to 1 person at a time. I stepped to the edge of the lawn. The night smelled like cut grass and the ghost of lemons from the house. The oak tree was a black map against a silver sky. Inside the tent, someone cheered because the bouquet did what bouquets do. I let the sound pass through me without catching. My phone vibrated. A message without a name said we need to talk. It did not threaten. It requested a witness. I turned the screen dark and let the quiet be the only thing I carried. When I looked back, the windows of the tent held the party like fish in a lit tank. Beautiful, contained, unaware of how clearly they could be seen from the dark. I breathed once more and felt the smallest click inside my chest where a lock had lived for years. The script had not burned. It had creased, and the crease ran through my name. The music returned with cautious hands, as if sound itself could tip a glass. People tried to follow it back to the place where laughter had been easy. Laughter did not want to be found. It circled the tent a few times and chose a corner to sit in, watching us with a tilted head. I stayed near the edge of the dance floor and let the room organize itself. A cousin drifted over with a careful smile and a plate of cake she pretended to be delivering to the table. She set it down and touched the chair back instead of touching me. "I did not know," she said. The sentence wore its shoes like someone dressed in the dark. "Most people do not," I answered. It was not cruelty. It was inventory. She nodded as if her head had been taught manners and returned to the crowd. The retired officer from the front row approached next. He did not offer apology or praise. He took my hand in both of his and held it for the exact length of time required for one truth to pass from bone to bone. Then he let go and returned to his seat without looking back. I admired a man who could do something cleanly and leave the room the same size. Someone tried to convince the guests to form a circle for a traditional dance. The circle never closed. People found edges to hold instead. The band chose a song with uncomplicated chords, the kind of melody parents like to sway to because it remembers their hands. Couples moved in small ovals. Candles lifted their tiny shoulders and behaved. When my mother appeared at my side, she did not look directly at me. She faced the dance floor and used her reflection in the window as if I were a smudge on glass. "You made a statement," she said. "I stood up," I said. "In your uniform," she added. "In front of people who speak to other people." "That is how uniforms work," I said softly. "People see them, people remember." Her jaw moved as if biting a thread. "We can smooth this," she said. "If you will say a few words to the right guests, if you will tell them you were overwhelmed and that Alexander was being theatrical, it will be easier for everyone." "It will be easier for you," I said. "I am not a problem to be smoothed. I am a person who stood where she was placed." She looked at me then, really looked, and I watched calculation step aside just long enough for something almost human to pass through. It did not stay. "Tomorrow is important," she said. "Do not pull attention that does not belong to you." "Attention is not a coat to be stolen from a chair," I answered. "It belongs to whoever is wearing it." Her breath thinned. She adjusted a pearl at her throat that did not require adjusting and left without permission to exit. The air she had occupied folded itself neatly and disappeared. I took a walk along the tent's edge and found a sliver of night where the grass remembered it was not furniture. The oak leaned over the yard like an old soldier who knows better than to tell his stories twice. A child slept under a table near the door, her shoes kicked off, a napkin for a blanket. She had tucked her fist beneath her cheek the way the very young do when the world has not yet told them to tie themselves to anything. Haley found me before the photographers did. She arrived with the silence of a person who has always been announced and is learning what happens when the trumpet fails. The wedding dress fit her like a decision. She held the skirt in one hand and her own arm with the other. "You embarrass me," she said. "No ceremony, no garnish." I stood up, I said again. "If a sentence is true, you can use it more than once." "You always wanted to be the center," she said. "Even as a kid, even now. You never understood that not everything is your battlefield." I turned toward the lawn and let the tent trace its rectangle of light across my shoulder. "I understood perfectly," I said. "I also understood that some rooms are built to make certain people vanish. I decided not to vanish." She laughed once and lost the sound midway. "God, Tessa, you could have stayed quiet. You could have let me have one day." "Your day was not broken by my silence," I said. "It was built on it." The sentence hung for a moment. Somewhere behind us a glass cracked in a hand and someone said, "It is fine, it is fine, it is nothing." Haley's face softened and sharpened at once, a trick she had practiced until the muscles knew it without her. "You will not ruin this," she said, and the words were small compared to what she wanted them to be. "I do not need to ruin anything," I said. "Things ruin themselves when they are fragile and held too tightly." We stood in the kind of quiet that belongs to kitchens at midnight and church parking lots at noon. Ordinary, relentless. She shook her head, and for a second I saw the girl who used to stand at the top of the stairs listening to our parents fight about nothing that sounded like everything. She blinked the memory away and left, the dress muttering against the lawn. Alexander came later, after 2 songs and the graceless cutting of the cake. He approached without apology, which I appreciated, and stopped a step farther than other men would have. He had learned something about distance tonight. "I should have done that a long time ago," he said. "You should have stood somewhere," I replied. "Sooner than this." He accepted the sentence without trying to fold it. "I will not pretend I did it for the right reasons," he said. "I did it because I could not stand myself in that chair." That counts, I said. Not toward me, toward you. He nodded. He looked at the tent, at the moving figures inside, at the candlelight drawing small halos around people who did not know they were being circled. When he spoke again, his voice lost its polish. I keep thinking about the sound right after the blast, he said. How there was no sound at all. How it felt like the world had been turned off. Tonight felt like that. And then it felt like the switch flipped back. I considered telling him that he was mixing metaphors, that people are not landscapes and rooms are not machines, but I let him have it. He had earned one human confusion. Do not use my name to wash anything, I said. Not for guests, not for the future. I will not, he said. You already did, I said, because truth uses its own arithmetic. But do not do it again. He accepted that too. He did not ask me for forgiveness. He said goodnight like a man who understood that asking was not the verb that belonged in this chapter, and walked back into the light with his shoulders set as if ready to be measured by someone other than himself. The band tried an up-tempo song to convince people to believe in rhythm again. Feet answered, because that is what feet do when drums make a promise. I watched the room from the threshold, the way people who survive learn to watch rooms. The coordinator gathered her clipboard and released a long breath she believed no one would notice. A server replaced a candle that had drowned in its own wax. The retired officer spoke to my mother, and she listened like a student does when the subject is a surprise. An aunt paused by my table and left a linen handkerchief folded exactly once. I did not unfold it. Even a square of cloth can be more than an object in the right light. I slipped it into my pocket like a sentence I would read later. Near midnight, the tent began to hollow. Guests left in the order determined by their lives. Parents early, friends later. A cousin disappeared with a grin that did not ask for witnesses. The band played a last song that felt like a gray sweater. The photographer took wide, forgiving shots. Someone stacked plates with the comfort of repetition. Parties do not end. They diminish until someone calls the remainder a memory. Outside, the air cooled. The oak released what it had been holding all day and let its leaves whisper. I stood where the grass thinned to walkway and let the night write itself across my skin. My phone buzzed again. Another message without a name. We need to talk. The words did not belong to fear. They belonged to consequence. I put the phone away. It could learn patience. Inside the house, the lights were already quieter. Hallway lamps only. The staircase held its own form of ceremony, the banister polished into a reflection that offered a narrow version of me. I climbed without looking into it. My room waited with the stillness of a place that remembers earlier versions and has not been asked to testify. I set the uniform across the back of the chair and pressed the collar flat with my palm. I touched each ribbon without counting. I let my fingertips memorize the order in case someone later insisted on numbers. I washed my face in water that ran cold without being asked. In the mirror, I saw a woman who looked exactly like herself, which felt new. I should have slept fast. I slept slow. Sleep came in pieces and stitched itself toward morning. When I woke, it was to the sound of a truck braking somewhere on the street and the smell of coffee rising up the stairwell. The house was already arranging itself for the day after. Houses are good at that. Before I left the room, I opened the top drawer of the desk and found a pen that still worked. On a clean sheet of paper, I wrote a single sentence. I will not sign your version of me. I folded it once, placed it under the handkerchief in my pocket, and slipped both into the inside breast of the uniform. Downstairs, the kitchen held strangers who had been hired to erase what had happened by polishing what could be polished. One of them looked up when I entered and gave me the kind of smile people give when they know nothing and are kind on purpose. It was the best thing I had received in that house, and it did not belong to it. I drank a cup of coffee with my back to the window and my face toward the door. A habit more than a strategy. My mother entered, dressed for errands that have the shape of control. She paused as if her body was testing a new verb and then chose to pass me without speaking. The absence of words can sometimes sound like acceptance from far away. It was not. It was silence, which is different. In the front hall, the floral arrangements had begun to surrender. In the sitting room, the portraits leaned in their frames as though curious. I stepped onto the porch and let the morning find all the surfaces it needed to find before it found me. The lawn held last night's footprints the way a page holds fingerprints. A neighbor walked her dog past the driveway and lifted a hand out of habit. I lifted mine because muscle memory applies to courtesy too. Behind me, the door did not close loudly. The house had learned at least that. I walked to the street without measuring my steps. The world smelled like damp wood and unclaimed intentions. Somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, a garbage truck lifted and set something down with a noise that felt like punctuation. I thought of the tent lights, the raised hand, the open space between two people who had been altered by a single sentence. I thought of the oak and its patient witness. I thought of a girl asleep under a table who would wake with a crease on her cheek and no memory of the moment a room decided to become honest. The trial was not over. It had barely begun. But you do not win these things, you stand them. And every time you stand, the room has to measure itself against you again. Morning behaved as if the house had done nothing unusual. The tent was gone. The lawn had its neat green back. Coffee moved through the vents like a polite rumor. My phone lay face down on the counter. 2 messages had arrived before dawn, the same sentence as last night. We need to talk. I turned the phone over and sent one word. When, the reply came fast. Noon. The oak. The kitchen workers moved like quiet weather. Somewhere a vacuum hummed. Somewhere a drawer agreed to close. I walked to the dining room. My mother stood over a drawer of linen and folded napkins with a precision that tried to make memory behave. She did not look up. You will be leaving today, she said. I will go when I am finished, I answered. Finished with what? With the parts of the story that still live here. She set a perfect stack on the table and turned. If her face were cut, it would bleed lemon polish. You will not tear this family apart. I will not, I said. I will show where it was torn. I left her to the napkins and crossed the hall to my father's study. The room still smelled like paper and the afterlife of pipe smoke. Sunlight rested on the desk in a neat rectangle. The leather chair remembered his back and pretended it did not know mine. I opened drawers, receipts that marched by year, stationery thick enough to bruise a fingertip, pens lined like a small formation. In the bottom drawer lay a shallow tray with old USB drives and a hard disk the size of a wallet. The labels were written in my mother's exact hand. Spring, summer, fall, then one that did not fit the pattern, letters. I put it in my pocket. The old laser printer sat on the credenza, faithful and sullen. A maintenance log was taped to the side. Barbara's initials repeated in short bursts. Haley's appeared once on a date I remembered for a different reason. The month a rumor about me had learned to walk. I powered the printer and opened the memory list. Machines keep ghosts for anyone who knows how to ask. A short history scrolled up. Complaint draft, anonymous submission. Small jobs printed on 3 dates. The oldest matched the day my commanding officer asked me to sit down and read a packet I would never forget. I printed the log. The page slid out warm, like a confession that did not know it had been waiting. I folded it and slipped it behind my phone case. When I turned, the retired officer from last night stood in the doorway with his cap in his hand. He had removed his jacket. His sleeves showed pale work scars that did not ask for pity. Colonel Whitaker, he said, placing the name in the room like a card. I thought you might come in here. People want a study to explain a house, I said. Often it only exposes it, he answered. He closed the door and then opened it a fraction, an old habit that lets sound escape if it needs to. I owe you a sentence from last night, he said. A few years ago, a neighbor asked me for a letter, not of character, not of recommendation, something meant to add weight to a complaint dressed as concern. I refused. I do not read anonymous. He watched my face. He did not need the flicker he saw. We both knew which neighbor he meant when he said friend of the family. Do you remember the phrases? I asked. He nodded. Reckless in public to draw attention. A pattern of escalation that placed others at risk. Words written by someone who believes exactness can stand in for truth. I had heard that language before in this house. It had come out of my mother's mouth the year I chose the academy over the internship she had arranged. It had praised my sister when she reached for a higher bracket. People reuse their cutlery and their words. If there is a formal path, take it, he added. Do not let rooms on the story. He left the door where he had set it almost closed. His steps faded down the hall. I shut the printer off and rested my palm on its lid. The plastic was warm. Warmth is a kind of proof that does not fit on a form. Noon came wrapped in heat. The oak kept a circle of shade like a secret. I arrived early and leaned my back against the trunk. Chair legs had pressed small squares into the grass. The lawn was trying to forget. Grass is better at it than people. Alexander walked up on time. He wore a plain shirt and the face of a man who had postponed himself and discovered he could not. He stopped a few paces away and looked at my hands. I kept them open. You sent the messages, I said. I did, he answered. I wanted to speak without an audience. Then speak. When I was finishing rehab, he said, an envelope reached me at the hospital, no return address. Inside were clippings and a letter. It said you had a history of theatrics. It said you endangered others to be seen. It hinted that the blast was tied to your choices. His voice held. His fingers did not. They closed, then opened. I did not believe it, he said, but I kept it. I told myself that keeping it made me responsible. That was a lie. Keeping it made me complicit. Do you still have it? I asked. He nodded and took a folded envelope from his pocket. The paper was expensive, the kind that wants to be called cotton. The flap had been cut with a knife. He handed me the letter. I read enough. Anonymous concern, pattern of escalation, performed heroics, dates that were almost right in a way that revealed the writer stood outside the walls and still felt entitled to label the rooms. There were clippings, he said. I took the stack. Local stories about trainings and ceremonies, a photo of me at a podium. The caption got my rank wrong and someone had circled it in red. The same red underlined performed heroics in the letter. This looks like my mother's pen, I said before I could stop the thought. I corrected myself. Or someone who buys the same pens. Does the exact hand change the harm? He asked. It changes the address, I said. Someone wrote, someone else lifted a glass. He watched light sift through the leaves and drop coins on the ground. I am sorry, he said. The words were simple and clean. For choosing her, for keeping the letter, for speaking late, I asked. For all of it, he said. And for what I cannot name yet. We stood until the shade cooled our ankles. When he left, I folded the letter and slid it inside my jacket with the printer log. Paper sat against paper. Two versions of the same silence. The afternoon stretched like old elastic. Family drifted through with containers of food and faces that tried to be careful. A cousin asked if I would be around more now. I told her I would be where the truth required me to stand. She nodded as if that were a street she could enter into a phone. I returned to the study and placed the USB-labeled letters beside the hard disk. I did not plug it in yet. I wanted to hold a few minutes of ignorance. It is the softest blanket we get. In the hallway, framed photos watched from their gold borders. My 12-year-old smile lived in the far corner, half hidden by a lamp. If I put my ear to the glass, I would hear only my own breath. This house teaches that trick early. On the porch, the evening cooled. Across the street, the neighbor watered hydrangeas with the patience of someone polishing a habit. She raised a hand. I raised mine. In another life, I might have asked what she had seen. In this one, I asked paper. When the light slipped, I set everything on the desk in my room. The letter, the log, the drive. The small tower looked ordinary. It had more weight than the furniture. I wrote one sentence on a sheet of clean paper and tucked it under the stack. I will not sign your version of me. Then I turned out the lamp and sat in the dark and listened to the house learn the shape of night. The stack on my desk looked ordinary from the doorway. A letter, a printer log, a small black drive. The USB labeled in a neat hand that believed labels could absolve. Ordinary is the disguise paper wears when it plans to change a room. I shut the door and pulled the curtains until only a ribbon of light crossed the floor. The old laptop in the closet still booted with a sigh. Its fan rose and fell like a tired chest. I slid the USB into the port and waited while the machine remembered how to listen. 4 folders appeared. Letters, drafts, envelopes, scans. The names were clean. The dates were not. They did not line up with holidays or trips or anything a stranger could guess. They lined up with the weeks my life had begun to tilt. I opened letters first. Inside were documents with titles that announced their innocence. Concern for standards. Note for review, anonymous packet. I clicked one and watched a paragraph come to life. The sentences wore the kind of balance that looks like fairness until you weigh it. Pattern of escalation. Performed heroics. Complaints shaped as questions, but the questions ended with periods. Drafts held earlier versions. Some were thick with track marks, revisions that still carried their old colors like bruises not yet faded. One margin note read simply too angry. Another said soften verbs. One file showed 2 author names in the property's window. Barbara, then Haley. The first erased, the second saved. Someone had learned how to clean a file but not how to hide a habit. Envelopes contained templates addressed to offices that handle standards and ethics, with salutations that pretended to care about burden. The return address line was blank. The font choices were deliberate. The spacing perfect. Anonymous wants to be elegant when it plans to wound. Scans held receipts. Certified mail slips with dates that matched the print log in the study. A shipping label for a packet to a regional office I knew too well. A note in the corner in that same small hand. Send before board meets. There was even a photo of a typed sheet beside the old printer, the edge of the credenza visible, the same maintenance log taped to its side. I could see a reflection of a wristwatch in the glass of the frame above it. It was my mother's. I copied everything to the drive I had brought and to the cloud account I kept under a harmless name. I made 3 folders: evidence, statements, names. I did not worry about neatness. Neatness had been their game. I wanted truth sorted by use. My phone buzzed on the desk. I let it ring twice before picking up. The voice began with my full name and ended with a friendly question mark. A reporter from a local station. She wanted a comment about last night's salute, about the whispers at the tent, about a photograph already circulating that had captured exactly the moment Alexander's hand reached his brow. She asked if I would like to offer context. I will, I said, when context does not get rearranged on air. We would keep it live, she promised. No edits. Then not yet, I said. Soon. She thanked me with the kind of soft tact that says she expects the story to ripen without her help. When I hung up the phone, I typed a sentence into a blank document and stared at it until it became a line I could stand on. I will speak when speaking protects someone besides me. A knock came, quiet and certain. I opened the door to find Colonel Whittaker with his jacket folded over one arm. He held a plain manila envelope in the other. I typed it, he said, while my memory still felt obedient. He placed the envelope on the desk and stood back. Inside was a sworn statement on letterhead I recognized from the Veterans Hall. It recorded his conversation with a neighbor years ago, the request for a letter to anchor an anonymous complaint, his refusal, and the date he had logged in a notebook he still kept in his kitchen. He had included a line I did not expect. If called, I will testify under oath to the facts contained here. Chain of custody matters, he said, reading my face the way soldiers do when they want to spare you an explanation. So does an old man's spine. Thank you, I said. I do not say those words lightly. He nodded once and left without turning his back to me, not out of fear, but out of respect he did not intend me to miss. I carried the envelope to the study and laid it beside the folded printer log. The pieces did not fit together. They did not need to. They simply had to point in the same direction. My mother was at the sink when I entered the kitchen. She washed a teacup that already shone and then placed it on a towel as if it needed to meditate. The window over the sink framed the oak in a way that made it look loyal. Who taught you to save? I asked. She did not turn. Save what? Histories, logs, the way a printer remembers, the way a file keeps a name after someone has told it to forget. We keep records in this family, she said. It is how we respect our work. And our weapons, I said. She dried the same cup again. The cloth moved in small, exact circles. Do not make a scene. I am making a record, I said. Scenes are for people who do not expect to be believed. She set the cup down and faced me. The posture was perfect, the voice steady, the eyes careful. You could walk away, she said. You could let your sister have her life. You could choose not to set fire to a house that already held a funeral. I am not a match, I said. I am a window. If light hurts, it is not my fault. Her throat worked once. She looked past me as if a different answer might be waiting near the door. None was. At last she said, you were always going to leave us. I left because you told the rooms to push me out, I said. You taught the walls to praise silence. I learned to breathe outside. She lifted the towel, folded it into a small square, and placed it on the counter with a precision that had once impressed me. Today it looked like a ritual for someone who had run out of prayers. Be kind to your sister, she said. She has never been as strong as you. Strength is not the ability to harm and survive it, I said. It is the refusal to harm even when you could. I did not wait to see what her face did next. I left her with the oak and the sink and the cup that did not need washing. In the hallway, I felt the old urge to run. Instead, I walked, slow, heel to toe, like a person who could be weighed and not moved. Haley's door was closed. I knocked and opened without waiting. She sat on the carpet among the drift of white tissue paper and pale shoes, tearing the edges into thin coils and letting them fall. The room smelled like a perfume sample that had been tested to the end of its little glass tube. You have a copy of the letter, she said, without looking up. I have the letter, I said, and the drafts and the receipts and the log. And a veteran willing to state what he was asked to do in this house. She smiled at the pile of shredded paper. You always were good at gathering supplies. I learned from the best, I said. She looked up then. For a second the face she used in public failed to attach. What do you want? She asked. It was not defiance. It was almost curiosity. Not a confession, I said. I already have one. I want you to hear what will happen. I told her about the station that had called. I told her about the Veterans Hall and the statement. I told her that I would speak with names only when the speaking protected people who could not stand at a podium without losing a job. I told her I would describe a pattern and offer documents and invite a conversation about process, not vengeance. I told her that if she wanted to be part of the repair, she could write her own statement. If she wanted to keep pretending this was a hobby, the story would write her in as a ghost. "Do you think a speech heals anything?" she asked softly. "No," I said, "but it stops a wound from being called a design." She threaded a length of tissue around her fingers and snapped it. The sound was small. "If I say I am sorry, will you stay?" "I will not stay for an apology," I said. "I will stay for a plan." She looked at the ring on her hand as if it were a question. "He will hate me," she said. "Do not outsource consequence to a man," I said. "It makes you smaller than you are, and you are already standing on your toes." She laughed then, and for a moment it was the sound she made when we were children and stole ice from the freezer to suck on in summer. Then she stopped. "Leave," she said, and lay back in the paper as if it were snow. In my room I drafted a statement, not a speech. A map. I kept my own name small and the verbs steady. I wrote about anonymous complaints that travel further than evidence. About how offices take caution and call it neutrality. About how families rehearse their narratives until the world mistakes performance for truth. I wrote about records that linger in machines and about the kind of courage that does not clap. When the words began to repeat themselves, I stopped. There is no virtue in more when the right has already arrived. I printed 2 copies and placed them in separate envelopes. I put the USB and the hard drive into my bag and zipped the teeth until the bag sounded sure. The house quieted with the light. The workers had gone. The rented dishes were loaded and counted. The floral foam slept in plastic bins in the garage like evidence that would never be called to testify. I carried my bag to the study one last time and stood before the flag on the wall. I did not salute. I did not need to. I closed my eyes and thanked the empty air for carrying voices I trusted. On the way upstairs, I stopped in the hallway and looked at the shelf of photographs. I reached up and moved the frame with my 12-year-old smile 2 inches to the left so the lamp no longer hid it. It was a small correction. Small corrections add up when you let them accumulate. Night gathered, patient and unafraid. The oak tree outside my window held its shape with the confidence of an old witness. I washed my hands and laid the uniform across the chair. I touched the sentence I had written earlier and slid it into the inner pocket of the jacket, where it pressed against my heart like a light stone. "I will not sign your version of me." In the dark, the house lost its angles and kept its breath. I listened to it breathe without asking it to become anything else. Tomorrow had work in it. Tomorrow had microphones and faces and the kind of quiet only truth can survive. I slept because morning would require a steady spine, and sleep is how the body puts one beam against another and calls it ready. Morning wore a cleaner light than the day before, the kind that makes edges look honest. The house moved in a quieter rhythm. Boxes of rented glassware had been lifted away. The driveway was clear. Even the porch had lost the scent of sugar. I made coffee and drank it standing at the back door, eyes on the oak that had learned our secrets faster than we had. Alexander texted at 9. "Can we talk?" A location followed, not the oak, not the house, something neutral. The small veterans' park by the river where names are carved into a wall that does not argue. I replied with a time and left before the kitchen could invent a reason to keep me. The park held the hush that belongs to places designed for listening. A low wall of stone. A flag that moved without needing to be noticed. The river kept its own pace and refused to share it. I sat on a bench under a maple and watched a stroller pass and a runner tie her shoe and a man teaching a boy to skip a flat rock. For a moment the world looked like a sentence that knew where to put its commas. Alexander arrived without ceremony. He wore a dark jacket and the look of a man who had measured his words and found the pile too small. He stood for a second, as if asking the air for permission, and then sat at the far end of the bench. Distance carried respect better than flowers ever had. "I have not slept," he said. "That is a popular pastime in this town," I said. "People practice it by calling it worry." He smiled, a tired pull that did not reach the eyes. "I asked myself last night what I would have wanted you to do if the roles were reversed. The answer made me ashamed." "What was the answer?" "I would have wanted you to tell the truth even if it ruined my comfort," he said. "I have been choosing my comfort for a long time." We let a pair of geese cross the path in their small parade before either of us spoke again. Somewhere behind us, the flag rope clicked softly against the pole in a rhythm that felt like a memory tapping its foot. "Tell me about the night you remember," I said. "Not the version in official reports, the one in your head." He stared at the water, jaw working as if it were an engine that had not been started in months. When he spoke, his voice was not dramatic. It was plain, which made it heavier. "I remember heat before I remember sound," he said. "There was static in my teeth. The blast sucked the air out of the trench and then pushed it back with all the kindness of a fist. I could not hear my own name when the medic shouted it. I could only hear the math. Leg torn, 20 meters of open ground, the metal under the dirt waiting to be touched the wrong way. I crawled, and then I stopped because my body decided that was enough of a plan." He pressed his fingers together until the knuckles whitened. "Then there were hands on my vest. Your hands, tight and cert. You did not speak, not to me. You spoke to the world in a voice I could not hear, a voice that said I am going to cut you from the night and you are going to let me. You dragged me and the ground complained and you did not apologize." He glanced at me, then back at the river. "I woke up in the bird with my mouth full of copper and a feeling that the sky had turned to glass. You were a shape looking down at me. I tried to say I owe you, and I think I said I owe, that you got lost in my throat. You said enough," I told him. "I said enough to build a debt I have been hiding behind ever since," he answered. "I told myself that marrying into your family was a way to be close to the truth without having to carry it. I told myself that silence was diplomacy. It was not. It was surrender in a nicer suit." A breeze moved over the river and made the water look briefly like a piece of silk being shaken out. I held the image and let it go. "I found the drafts," I said. "USB drives, printer logs, certified slips. The letter you brought me matches the dates. The pen marks look like my mother. The file properties carry your fiancé's name." He closed his eyes. "I thought so." "I confronted her," I said. "She called it a hobby. She thinks narration is not harm." He winced. "I told myself last year that if I learned anything like that, I would not move forward." When the shadows arrived, I looked away and decided they were shade. We sat with the word and allowed it to cool. The boy by the river finally made a stone skip 3 times and shouted with the pride that belongs to simple victories. His father clapped in a way that was better than an audience. "I am going to speak tomorrow," I said. "Not with names I cannot yet protect. With a pattern I can. I will put documents on record. I will offer a path instead of a bonfire. I will be clear about what anonymous power does to institutions that pretend to be neutral." "Do you want me there?" he asked. "I want you to decide where you can stand without lying," I said. "That may be beside me, that may be silent, but it cannot be somewhere that tries to look like both." He made a small sound in his throat that might have been grief. "If I stand beside you, it will hurt her. If you do not, it hurts everyone who is not invited to defend themselves," I said. "Pain is already here, you get to choose its direction." He looked at his hands as if they belonged to an earlier draft. "There is another thing," he said. "It will not make you feel better, but it is true. When I asked her to marry me, I wanted steady. I wanted a life that did not ask the kind of questions war had asked. I did not choose well. That is not your burden to carry, but it is a part of this." "I do not need your reasons," I said. "I need your accuracy. If you are asked on record whether you received an anonymous letter about me that affected your opinion, you will say yes. If you are asked who sent it, you will not say you do not know." He nodded slowly, as if the motion had to pass through a few old walls to reach his neck. "I will tell the truth. About the salute too," I said. "It cannot become theater. You did not perform, you recognized." "I recognized," he said, "and I will not let anyone sell it as anything else." He fell quiet, then added, "I thought about asking you not to speak. I thought about pleading for time. I realized the only time I should have asked for was years ago, and I used it to pretend." We watched a barge push upriver with the stubbornness of old machinery. Steel, water, current, will. 4 elements, none of them complicated, all of them heavy. "You wondered once if you loved her," I said. "You do not need to answer me. Answer yourself." He did not answer aloud. His face answered anyway. After a while he said, "There is something like love. There is more fear than love. That ratio is not a marriage. I learned that last night when the room changed shape and I wanted to stand upright inside it." "You can leave a room you have built," I said. "It is harder when the walls are made of promises, but it is not impossible." He turned then and studied me as if trying to memorize this angle for later, the way people look at a map when they know the road will be dark. "You will not forgive me for being late. I will not carry your lateness for you," I said, "but I do not need to hate you to refuse it." He inhaled, a full breath that seemed to reach the bottom of him. "I do not deserve your gentleness." "It is not gentleness," I said. "It is allocation. I put my energy where it will matter." A silence followed that did not bruise. We both watched the water take the light and break it and bring it back together. Even the geese had decided to leave us alone. "I need one more thing," I said at last. "Consent. If tomorrow goes as I expect, the press will circle." A few will ask questions meant to bait me into spectacle. If they ask about you, I will say only what is already public. If they ask about the letter, I will say you have confirmed receipt and that you are available to confirm that yourself. I will not read your words for you. Do you consent to that? Yes, he said. Use my confirmation, use my name. Then we are finished here, I said. He stood but did not step away. There is a warehouse where the caterers were loading last night, he said. Behind it is a service lot where no one parks on weekdays. If you need to walk before tomorrow, it is quiet there. Sometimes quiet is easier when it smells like forklifts. I used to go there after rehab. It reminded me that work continues when no one claps. I will remember, I said. He offered his hand. I took it. We did not hold long. There is a length that honors and a length that pretends. We chose the first. When he had gone, I stayed on the bench and let the morning finish becoming afternoon. The maple gave an occasional leaf to the path and pretended it had not noticed. I thought about the field in Helmand again, the angle of the ditch, the shape of the sky when rotors cut it into pieces, the way a body decides on life before the mind can vote. I do not think of myself as a savior. I think of myself as a person who refuses to be instructed by fear. On the way back, I stopped at a small print shop that smelled like toner and impatience and asked the clerk to make clean copies of the statement I had drafted. He worked with the cheerful care of someone who likes machines more than arguments. He stapled each packet neatly and squared the stack on the counter. Pages made their own kind of order. I paid in cash and thanked him because gratitude teaches your spine how to stand at better angles. At the house, the afternoon rested in the stairwell like a cat. I carried the packets to my room and slid one into my bag and one into the inner pocket of the uniform and one under the mattress because old habits do not apologize. I took the letter and the log and the drive and photographed each with timestamps visible, then mailed the images to an account that would not forget me if my phone did. A text came from Ruiz across the ocean. Heard you are walking into weather. Remember to keep the field small. I replied that the field would be only as large as the truth on it, and he sent back the single word good, which is the longest encouragement he ever lets himself send. Evening bent the light. The house settled. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lawnmower pretended it was necessary. I stood at the bedroom window and framed the oak with my hands, a childish trick that made it look like a picture I could pocket. I made a list of what I would say and what I would not say and put a period after each item. Periods are small fences. They keep speeches from wandering into fields that grow regret. Before I slept, I set the uniform on the chair and the shoes under it and the packet on the table. I placed the sentence I had written earlier inside the jacket where it would press against my chest when I stood. I will not sign your version of me. I turned off the lamp and let the dark arrive. It did not ask for anything. It covered everything the same way. In the quiet, I let myself imagine the room tomorrow, the microphones, the first question, the second one, the way sound moves across faces. Somewhere in that vision, I let myself also imagine Alexander telling the truth in a voice that belonged to him. I did not cling to it. I set it on a shelf where I could see it and walked past. Sleep came the way honest things do, not fast, not slow, certain. Tomorrow would have its own weather. I would bring my own spine. The warehouse sat behind a strip of quiet storefronts, a low concrete building with loading bays like mouths at rest. Forklifts slept with their keys removed. The air smelled like cut cardboard and old citrus cleaner. The lot was empty except for a single gull that had mistaken asphalt for shore. I walked the perimeter once, then again. The quiet here was different from the house. It did not perform. It held. My steps traced a slow rectangle as if I were reminding the ground of its borders. The packet in my bag felt exact against my hip. I kept one hand on the strap and let my breath fall into a rhythm that could carry weight. A side door opened and a woman in a gray hoodie stepped out with a broom. She noticed me and offered the cautious nod strangers trade when they agree to leave one another alone. She swept a neat square around the threshold, then leaned on the handle and looked up at the sky as if checking for whether no one had scheduled. Big wedding last night, she said finally, not asking. Big enough, I said. She laughed once, a dry sound. They always look bigger under the lights. Same trash in the morning. Her name patch read Leela, stitched in blue. She squinted at me and shifted the broom. You were the one in the uniform. I inclined my head. Thought so, she said. Respect. She did not make it a performance. She made it a sentence and let it stand. You keep walking. I will pretend you belong here. I am good at pretending on weekdays. Thank you, I said. She pushed the broom again, a clean stripe through dust, then paused. Woman with perfect hair came through here at dawn for a box we forgot. Smelled like lemons and decision. I have never seen anyone take a taped carton like it was a trophy. Which door? I asked. She pointed with her chin to the far bay. She signed for it in neat letters like she did not believe pens could shake. Barbara. The driver said he remembered her from yesterday when she insisted on checking every count against a list she brought herself. People make lists when they do not trust the world to hold still. Did she say anything? I asked. Leela shook her head. Just thank you in a way that sounded like instruction. You want the clipboard copy? It is in the office. I am supposed to shred it later. I can shred it tomorrow instead. I would appreciate seeing it, I said. She held the door for me and nodded toward a small desk. A ring binder sat open to the morning's page. There it was. Barbara's signature curled but firm, standing in a column that did not expect argument. I photographed the sheet with the timestamp visible and set the binder back the way it had been. Do me a favor, Leela said as I turned to leave. When you take what you need, do not burn the rest of us in the fire. We just clean up the rooms, we do not set the table. I do not burn people who are working, I said. I like corners. She considered that and smiled with one side of her mouth. Good, corners collect things, be safe. Back at the house, the day had shifted from bright to glassy. The ground heat had started to rise and made the driveway shimmer. I found Colonel Whittaker sitting on the porch step with a paper cup of coffee. He stood when he saw me and touched 2 fingers to his cap in a gesture that managed to be casual and ritual at once. The hall can host you tomorrow, he said without preface. We will do it in the main room, live, as you asked. The station wants noon. I called 3 other outlets and told them to bring their own cameras or they would be late to their own integrity. You are efficient, I said. I am old, he replied. Age teaches you which doors to knock on, also which ones to ignore. He handed me a small list written in a disciplined hand, 2 reporters he trusted, one he did not with a note beside the name that read like straps. A short line that said podium on wheels, flags behind because the optics will calm the people who breathe with their eyes. I do not need grandeur, I said. You need a frame, he said. Otherwise they will try to paint over you. He stepped down from the porch and paused. One more thing, I have asked 6 men and women to stand at the back wall, not up front for theater, back for spine. They served. They will not say a word. They will make a shape that the cameras cannot erase. Thank you, I said, and meant it until my chest warmed. When he left, my mother appeared in the doorway as if she had been formed by the stillness he made. She wore a dress that would photograph well in a corridor. Her hands were empty. I heard you will be speaking, she said. It was not an inquiry. It was the announcement of a weather report. I will be telling the truth, I said. Truth is not a speech, she said. Truth is a hallway you build slowly so people can walk through. You bricked one of the doors, I said. I will reopen it. She looked out toward the street where heat made the air tremble. I kept this family intact through years of small and large attacks. I kept calendars, casseroles, charities. I held faces together with my bare hands. I will not be your enemy because I refuse to be your audience. You are not my enemy, I said. You are my example. I learned containment from you. I am choosing to use it differently. She lifted her chin a fraction. If you say my name tomorrow, say it so softly I do not hear it. I will not say your name, I said. If there is mercy in me, it will arrive as omission. She left the way she had come, the air closing behind her without a sound. I drafted a brief advisory and sent it to the addresses on Whittaker's list. The subject line was a sentence that behaved, statement on anonymous complaints and process integrity. I included the time, the location, a single line about documents made available after remarks, and a note that questions would be taken until the answers had been said enough. Ruiz called as the emails left. The connection cracked across the ocean and then settled. You have a room, he said. I have a room, I said. Keep the field small, he reminded me. I will fence the edges with periods, I said. He laughed once. You will be fine, and even if you are not, you will still be honest. That is better. In the late afternoon, Alexander texted. I told her I will confirm receipt of the letter on record. I will not read it. I will not pretend not to know where it came from. I am at a hotel. I need a night where no object in the room has been labeled for me. I typed a reply and deleted it, then typed another and kept it. Thank you for accuracy. Do not ask to be forgiven by microphone. Haley did not text. Silence has its own ringtone. I packed my bag as if for a short deployment. Uniform, copies of the statement, the letter, the log, the USB, a portable charger because batteries like to fail during truth. The handkerchief an aunt had left on my chair because talismans help, even when you do not believe in them. Evening fell across the house like a clean sheet. Cats that did not belong to us crossed the yard with the calm of rightful owners. I stood at the back door and listened to the oak. Trees make no promises and keep them all the same. I thought of the girl under the table 2 nights ago, sleeping through the moment a room changed its mind. I thought of Mrs. Langford across the street with her hose, steady as a clock. Rooms and neighbors, witnesses and water. I expected Haley would come. She did not. My mother passed my doorway once, paused, and moved on. Somewhere in the house somebody set a glass down too hard and then apologized to no one. The refrigerator hummed. The day ended. Sleep arrived like a stranger who had read the address twice. I took it in and gave it the chair by the window. It did not stay long. Morning found me before the alarm did. The light was honest. I ironed the jacket with a care that made the fabric listen. I pinned each piece where it belonged without counting aloud. The sentence rested in the inner pocket against my heart, its paper cool and willing. I will not sign your version of me. The Veterans Hall looked smaller than it had in my anticipation, which helped. Smaller rooms make honesty feel less like performance. Whitaker met me at the side door and walked me through the corridor lined with photographs of faces that had learned to square themselves for history. He gestured toward the main room. Flags stood at the back like tall witnesses. A plain podium waited with a microphone that had not yet learned my voice. Reporters trickled in. Tripods bloomed like metal flowers. A woman in a navy suit with comfortable shoes checked her levels and tested her good eyebrow. The one Whitaker had marked as likes traps smiled at me as if we had already agreed to a script. I smiled back as if I had learned to read. The 6 veterans entered without ceremony and took a place along the back wall. They did not cross their arms. They did not shift their weight loudly. They were there like pillars that had chosen to be seen. Whitaker stood near the door where he could intercept any plan that tried to change itself midair. My phone buzzed. Alexander, here if you need my sentence. Back row. I chose not to turn and look. Needing is not the verb I wanted just then. I sent a single period to say I had received the message and returned my attention to the podium. A producer lifted 3 fingers. Then 2. Then 1. The room clicked into the kind of silence that is not emptiness but attention. I stepped forward and felt the weight of the jacket ease my shoulders into alignment. Breath, spine, voice. I had rehearsed the first line enough to find it even if the lights went out. Thank you for coming, I said. I will be brief and I will be clear. The microphone found my tone and accepted it. The first paragraph was the map. I drew the edges of the field. I told them what I would not talk about. I told them what I would. I said I had received the support of veterans who believed process should not be a maze. I said anonymous power had been used to rearrange my life and the lives of others, and that I had brought documents that refused to be rearranged again. There was a moment, 1 heartbeat long, in which I nearly said the name that had been sitting inside my mouth since I found it printed at the bottom of a draft. I did not. That belonged to part 6, to a reveal that would not be an explosion but a geometry lesson drawn on air. Today, I carried the ruler and the chalk and drew straight lines. I placed the letter on the table. I placed the printer log beside it. I placed the copies of my statement on the edge for hands to take. I spoke the dates. I described the pattern. I offered the path for any office that claimed to care about fairness to follow. I kept my voice low enough to be heard. When questions came, I answered the ones that were questions. I smiled at the ones that were bait and said, I will not comment on gossip. When the trap reporter tried to make me say Alexander's name in a way that tasted like spectacle, I said, a witness has confirmed receipt of an anonymous letter about me. He will confirm it on record. That is enough today. It took 11 minutes. Truth does not need more when the documents are neat. I stepped away and allowed the room to move without me. Whitaker met me by the side door and did not speak. He put his hand on my shoulder instead and let it sit there long enough for my bones to remember company. Outside, the light had sharpened. The parking lot carried the sound of a truck backing into a space and a child telling a parent that the flag looked like it was breathing. Alexander stood near the far curb with his hands at his sides, not in his pockets, not folded. A reporter asked him a question and he gave the sentence we had agreed was accuracy. Then he stepped away. My phone chimed. A single line from an unknown number. You do not get to write me out. I read it twice and put the phone back in my pocket. Not yet, I thought. Not yet. I walked to the curb and let the heat rise around my ankles. Wind lifted the fringe of the flag and laid it back down. Whitaker joined me and said nothing because nothing was required. Behind us, the hall door swung on its hinge and came to rest. Part 6 would hold the turn. I could feel it waiting like a door that had finally learned which way it opened. For now, Part 5 had done its work. Debt clarified, choice declared, a field the size of truth and not an inch wider. By late afternoon, the veterans' hall breathed like a careful animal. Cables ran along the floor under strips of black tape. 2 cameras blinked. A banner read community forum in letters big enough to make shy people sit down. Colonel Whitaker stood near the door with his arms loose at his sides, quiet as a pillar. Alexander waited in the last row. I did not turn to look. Choice is not a mirror. I ate half a sandwich by the service exit and drank water until my hands steadied. A producer explained the path my voice would take. From the microphone to a truck in the lot. From the truck to a mast. From the mast to living rooms where dinner would scrape across plates that did not know my name. The thought helped. I like the idea of truth arriving while someone salts their soup. The panel opened the room. A legal advisor from the clinic spoke about process without putting people to sleep. A woman who protects whistleblowers named the distance between safety and spectacle. A chaplain offered a sentence about confession as craft. Each voice built a small step. The room began to learn how to walk. The moderator turned to me. Her notes wore pencil corrections that erased cleanly. She said my name and asked if I was prepared to identify the author of the letter. I kept my breath low. I kept my voice level. I am. Chairs settled. Pens stopped moving. I opened a folder and laid the copies where cameras could see them. Certified slips. A print log from my father's study. The picture of the old printer with the credenza frame reflecting a wristwatch I knew better than my own. Colonel Whitaker's sworn statement on letterhead that had already outlived more storms than this. The letter that accused me of performed heroics and a pattern of escalation was written on paper from my family house, I said. It was mailed from this town on a date that matches the memory of the printer in our study. Draft files show 2 author names in their property's window. The first was Barbara Vega. The second replaced it and saved. The second was Haley Vega. I let the sentence rest. Silence is a tool when it belongs to you. I gave the room another line. The maintenance log on the printer carries my mother's initials. The certified slips carry her signature. The drafts hold margin notes in my sister's hand that read softened verbs and too angry. The packet that reached a hospital bed included clippings marked in the same red ink kept in a drawer at home. Years ago, a neighbor asked Colonel Whitaker to supply a letter to anchor an anonymous complaint. He refused. His memory of the phrasing aligns with the language in these drafts. I looked into the nearest lens. The author of the letter was my sister. The effort that made it travel was shared. The sound that followed was human and not pretty. A chair leg scraped. A person breathed out as if metal had been lifted from the chest. In the last row, someone whispered a prayer without remembering the soft voice people use for prayers on television. The moderator asked why I chose to say it here and now. Because anonymous force is not fairness. Because institutions learn to fear the wrong storm. Because a complaint with merit can sign its name, and if it cannot, it should not be used to move a life. Hands rose. Questions came. I gave dates and verbs that did not wobble. The trap reporter tried to sell this as family quarrel dressed in policy. It is a policy failure revealed by family, I said, and let the word failure keep its weight. A veteran in a jacket with a broken zipper stood without waiting. A memo sat in my file for 10 years because a sergeant disliked my mouth, he said. It took a decade to pull it. Keep going. I thanked him. His sentence bridged the room. Movement at the side door pulled the air. My mother stepped inside with a spine that tried to correct the architecture. She did not walk the aisle. She did not line up at the floor microphone. She stood where entrances think about becoming exits and lifted her chin by the smallest degree. The cameras turned. The room felt the temperature change. I gave no instruction. Rules already existed. A reporter with a notebook softened by use asked what I would say to the sister watching at home. The word sister felt like a place. I do not need an apology to continue, I said. I need a plan to repair what you chose to break. You must carry your own reasons. Mine are already heavy enough. From the wall microphone came a voice I knew. Alexander did not look at me. I confirmed that I received an anonymous letter about Captain Vega while recovering in hospital. I confirmed that I kept it in a drawer. I confirm that I allowed it to color my judgment. I confirm that I know who sent it now and that I should have asked harder then. That is my sentence. He stepped back. No one tried to steal more. 2 final questions. I took one about reform and offered a path instead of a fire. I took one about culture and named the habit that treats gossip like neutral fog. Then I closed. Documents are available at the back. My statement is printed for anyone who needs clean language for their own fight. Take only what you will use. I will be brief and I will be clear. That is all. Applause arrived in pockets, not as a wave. The 6 veterans along the wall did not clap. Pillars do not clap. They hold. I stepped from the podium. The moderator ended the forum with logistics. The red lights on the cameras went dark. I moved toward the side door. My mother met me halfway in the shadow of the exit sign. Her face was dry. She has never given water to a room. "You called my work by a document," she said. "I called it by its name," I answered. "Do you expect me to apologize on a curb? I expect you to sign your own version and stop asking others to sign it for you." She looked toward the flags. "I kept this family together," she said. "You have no idea how many bargains that required." "I know what they cost," I said. "I paid most of them in silence. You could have left my name out." "I did," I said, "until you printed it yourself." She did not ask what I meant. The wristwatch in the glass would answer for me. She stepped aside. I walked into the light. Outside, the lot smelled like warm asphalt. Reporters formed and unformed small groups, already feeding their shows. Whitaker leaned against the brick and studied the cloud line like a man reading orders written in sky. Alexander stood near the curb with his hands open at his sides. He did not move toward me. It looked like distance. It felt like respect. My phone buzzed, a text without a name. "You will regret this." I typed a reply and erased it. I typed another. "I regret only the years I was quiet." I sent it and let the device be heavy in my pocket. A woman stopped me with careful kindness. Her brother had lost rank because of an unsigned note. No one had ever learned who wrote it. She had recorded the forum for him. Would I accept a hug? I said yes. Sometimes the body needs a verb that is not argue. The day folded along a new crease. The hall emptied in gentle pieces. The banner came down. The flag stayed up. Inside my jacket the sentence I had written pressed a cool square against my heart. "I will not sign your version of me." Part 6 had only begun to turn. The rest of the spin would arrive when the House admitted what paper had already confessed. For now I stood in the heat and let the wind lift the corner of the day, and I understood the simplest thing. Public truth is not loud. It is steady. The parking lot thinned until only heat and a few careful voices remained. I sat in the front seat with the door open and let the air move through. The phone vibrated on the console like a patient animal. Messages stacked. A captain I had trained wrote 3 words. "Proud of you." A woman I did not know sent a photograph of a binder with a sticky note that read "Purge rumor page, thank you." Ruiz wrote a single period, which is how he says hold fast. I drove once around the block to let my hands learn the shape of ordinary again, then returned to the hall. Whitaker was finishing a call by the back door. He lifted his chin toward the side room. Inside, a folding table held paper cups and a tray of shy cookies. I poured water and watched my reflection buckle in the thin plastic. Alexander came to the doorway and did not enter. He stood with his hand on the frame as if asking the room to decide for him. I nodded and he stepped in. We did not touch. We did not pretend that this was a private moment with a bow on it. "I gave the sentence you asked for," he said. "I heard it," I replied. "The rest is yours," he said. He looked at the cookies and chose nothing. "Do you think she will speak?" "Haley speaks when there is a crowd," I said, "or a mirror." "And your mother?" he asked. "She will choose a corridor with good lighting and call it a hallway of truth," I said. "It will still be a corridor." He closed his eyes for a breath. "I am sorry for my lateness," he said. "I know," I said. "Carry it without asking me to help." He accepted that and left. The sentence he had used in the hall already felt truer than anything else he could say today. Accuracy is a strange comfort. I stepped outside and called the reporter who had promised no edits. She answered on the first ring. A hum of controlled chaos breathed through her line. I told her I would provide digital copies of the documents with personal addresses redacted. I told her I would write a short addendum clarifying that the purpose of naming was to fix a process, not to punish a person. She thanked me with a voice that belonged to someone who had wrestled with sound for years and learned to be kind to it. By evening, the forum replayed on smaller screens. Mrs. Langford texted an image of her television. The angle had caught the moment I placed the printer log on the table. Her caption said I watered the garden during your sentences, so I would not cry in the living room. I wrote back that plants deserve honest water. She sent a heart that looked slightly surprised to find itself on her phone. At the house, the porch light had already been turned on, though the sky still kept some blue. The door opened before I reached it. My mother stood in the frame like a column that had chosen fabric. Her voice was even. "You have made a mess," she said. "No," I said. "I have labeled one." She stepped aside. The dining room smelled of lemon again, a reflex more than a choice. On the table lay 3 newspapers, one local, one regional. One from the capital with a homepage printout clipped to the front. The headlines were cautious, the way editors are cautious when the story was born in a living room. "You could have come to me," she said. "I did," I said. "For years, you trained the air to ignore me." She rested a hand on the chair back. The gold of her ring flashed and dimmed. "I will not collapse in front of you," she said. "I did not ask you to collapse," I said. "I asked you to sign your work." She pressed her lips together until a small white line appeared. "I kept this family safe," she said. "You do not know how much ugliness the world has." "I know exactly how much," I said, "and what it looks like when it wears perfume." A soft sound came from the hallway. Haley hovered by the arch, bare feet on the wood, hair pulled into a loose knot that pretended at ease. She held a phone with the camera still open as if she had been filming her courage and forgot to press save. "You said my name on live television," she said. "I said your actions," I replied. "Names are shorter than actions. They fit on air." She looked smaller than the dress had made her. "Do you want me to apologize?" she asked. "I want you to write a statement, sign it, and deliver it to the offices that received the letter," I said. "I want you to say what you did and why, without blaming a season or a mood. I want you to stop hiding behind elegant stationery." Her eyes filled and did not spill. "If I do that, everyone will hate me," she said. "Not everyone," I said, "just the part of you that knows better." She blinked hard. "You are cruel," she said. "I am specific," I said. "Cruelty would be letting you keep the mask until it grows into your skin." My mother made a fragile sound that might have been my name and might have been a prayer for a different child. I did not look at her. The oak outside the window was black in the glass and looked like a drawing made by a steady hand. "I will draft something," Haley said suddenly, as if the decision had been waiting under her tongue for hours. "Do it tonight," I said. "Truth loses heat if it sleeps." She turned away and the phone in her hand finally shut off. The hallway swallowed her figure. My mother stayed standing, a statue in a museum that did not yet know the plaque had the wrong date. I carried my bag upstairs and set it on the chair. The uniform hung beside the window like a calm guest. I opened the laptop and wrote the addendum I had promised. I kept it tight. I did not add adjectives that wanted applause. I attached the files and sent them. The message left with the small whoosh that modern mail uses to convince itself it is important. There was a knock. A real one, not soft, not theatrical. I opened the door. My mother stood alone in the hall. She had changed into a simple sweater and the lack of armor made her look almost new. "I signed the slips because the lines needed a name," she said. "I chose mine because I believed that was what a mother does." I did not read the drafts closely. I saw that they wore the tone of concern. I told myself that tone was enough. I told myself that attention to detail is a virtue. I did harm with it. I will not use the word sorry tonight. It is too small. She handed me a plain white envelope with my first and last name written in her hand. Inside was a single sheet. "I have requested that the offices strike the complaint from their archives. I have written that it was authored from our address by my younger daughter. I have signed my name. I did not praise myself for doing it. Barbara." I folded the paper and slid it into the inner pocket of the jacket, behind the sentence that had lived there all week. The two rested together like stones that agreed about weight. "Thank you," I said. She nodded and left. The hallway kept the shape of her absence for a few breaths and then relaxed. Near midnight, the reporter texted to confirm receipt of the files and to say that the segment would run again in the morning with the addendum on screen. She asked if I would take one radio call at dawn. I said yes because the voice travels in places cameras do not. I slept and dreamed of the printer in the study feeding out blank pages that landed on the floor like snow. In the dream, the machine never jammed and I could not tell whether that was peace or warning. At 4, the radio producer called early. We recorded in one take. She asked if justice had been done. I said no. I said this was not justice. This was light. Justice would be a system that did not need my name to function. When daylight came, the house looked like a place that had chosen to breathe. Haley slipped an envelope under my door with a draft of her statement. It was clumsy and honest in places and frightened in others. I marked it with a pen that did not bite. Remove the sentence about sisterly concern. Keep the line where you say I wanted to be the person people listen to. Sign with your full name. She read the notes in the hallway, then wrote the final version at the kitchen table and sent it before breakfast. I walked to the porch and stood in the cool. The oak rearranged the light as if practicing for longer days. Across the street, Mrs. Langford waved a watering wand at nothing in particular and called good morning. I called it back. My phone chimed one last time. A new message from an address that had been silent for years. It was a reply to an old email I had sent the week my father died. The subject line read Ray. The body held a single line. I was wrong. It had no signature. It did not need one. I closed the phone and put it away. Part 6 had finished its turn. The world had not shattered. It had tilted just enough for truth to hold. I went inside to make coffee for a house that had decided to learn a new kind of mourning. Morning arrived without ceremony. The house did not whisper or glare. It simply breathed, a structure that had learned a new rhythm overnight. I made coffee and carried it to the porch. The oak lifted the light the way a careful hand lifts fabric. Somewhere, a trash truck announced its presence and then forgot to be loud. I looked at the street as if it might answer a question I had not asked aloud. Haley's statement had gone out before dawn. I knew because the radio read from it at 6, the host clearing his throat around the sentence where she wrote I wanted to be the person people listened to. The voice softened at the end when she signed her full name. I did not feel triumph. I felt the quiet a room earns after it finally opens a window. Inside, my uniform hung from the chair back, calm as a witness who has given her last word. I smoothed the sleeve and placed the handkerchief in the inner pocket with the letter from my mother and the single line I had written days ago. I will not sign your version of me. The paper had softened from body heat. It felt less like a blade now and more like a key. I walked the rooms one more time. The study carried the weight of the flag without asking for mine. The printer sat in the same square of sunlight, no longer a trap, just a machine. In the hallway, I moved the photograph of my 12-year-old self another inch into the light until the lamp could no longer pretend to be a cloud. Small corrections accumulate. They change the angle of a day. My mother found me in the dining room. She held a folder as if it might bruise. Her face had lost the lacquer that made it look permanent. For the first time in years, she seemed made of changeable parts. I sent the letters, she said. I received one confirmation. One office struck the complaint from its archive. The others sent receipts and a promise to review. Good, I said. I did not know how to write the rest, she added. You wrote enough, I answered. The rest is work, not prose. She looked at the table where place settings used to rehearse control. We could eat here tonight, she said, and the sentence fell between us like something fragile. I leave this afternoon, I said. She nodded without surprise. You always had a departure in your pocket. It is not escape, I said. It is direction. She closed the folder and held it against her chest. When you were a child, you lined up toy soldiers on the windowsill. You gave them names and moved them with care. I told you to put them away. I wanted the sill clean. I could have watched the stories you were making. I chose to polish wood instead. I did not rescue her with comfort. She had found the right regret without my help. I walked to the Veterans Hall to return keys and signatures. Colonel Whittaker met me at the back door with 2 paper cups. The coffee was the exact temperature that says someone paid attention. You will hear from offices for months, he said. Some will change their forms, some will change their habits, some will change nothing and call that wisdom. I will file without shouting, I said. You will stand without permission, he said, and smiled with one corner of his mouth. A note from the station. The segment will be used in trainings, not the drama, the map you drew. We sat on the steps for a while, watching a boy ride a bike in circles so wide they almost looked like lines. Only after a long quiet did he ask, do you want to say goodbye to the men and women who stood along the wall? I already did, I said. I said it when I told the room to take only what it would use. He lifted his cup in salute. I lifted mine. At the river, the Veterans Park held its usual hush. I traced the names with my eyes, not my fingers. Touch has its own rituals, and I keep mine for graves I know. A jogger passed, nodded, and kept her rhythm. The flag made its patient sound. I let the air clean the last of the forum from my lungs. On the way back, I stopped at the small print shop. The clerk with careful hands had saved a packet for me. He slid it across the counter like a sacred thing. Inside lay 10 copies of my statement and 10 of the process notes, each bound with a thin strip that did not pretend to be ribbon. For a moment, the room smelled like toner and second chances. Good luck, Captain, he said. I make my own, I replied. He grinned. You also print it. At the house, Haley waited by the stairs with red eyes and bare feet. She looked at the bag in my hand and then at my face. Do you hate me? She asked, a small voice for a question that deserved an adult. I do not have room for that, I said. I have room for accuracy and for what you build next. If I build nothing, she said, does the apology still count? It counts as a door, I said. Doors are not rooms. She swallowed and nodded. He went to the hotel again, she added. He left his ring on the dresser. That is not mine to fix, I said. I know, she whispered. I wanted you to know the world shifts even when you stop speaking. I noticed, I said, and I did not ask whether she wanted me to be relieved. In my old room, I packed the last small things: a medal that meant more to strangers than it did to me, a notebook with 3 clean pages that I had been saving for a better sentence and never used, a pin from a jacket that had survived rain and salt and one brief fire. I left the track medal from high school behind on purpose. The ribbon had faded to the color of a late peach. It belonged to a girl who had not yet learned what pace her life required. Alexander texted, a single line: "I told my mother I will speak on record when asked." It felt like a line he had written for himself and then allowed me to read. I typed back 2 words: "Stand steady." He sent a period. We both understood. I called Ruiz and let the phone ring until the ocean answered. "You done?" he asked. "For this room," I said. "Good," he said. We have cadets who think courage is the moment you shout. Come show them the kind that keeps a spine level for an hour without raising a voice. "I will bring notes," I said. "Bring your silence," he answered. "The notes will follow it." Before I left, I walked the yard. The hydrangeas across the street kept their improbable blue. Mrs. Langford waved me over and pressed a brown paper bag into my hands. Inside was a jar of jam with a crooked label that read summer. "For the road," she said. "I watered my garden during your sentences so I could cry outside. If that is not love, it is at least good drainage." "It is both," I said, and her laugh shook her shoulders. My mother joined me on the porch. We did not touch. We looked at the street we had lived on and the trees that had kept our secrets and our performances in equal measure. "You always walk away like you already belong somewhere else," she said. "I always walk toward something," I said. "Will you come back?" she asked. "When there is something to bring," I said, "or when the oak writes me a letter." She almost smiled. "Do trees write?" "They keep the ink," I said. "We supply the paper." A car horn sounded from the curb. The driver stepped out and lifted my bag. He had the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned to move things without chipping them. I paused at the bottom step and looked back. My mother stood framed by the doorway, not a column now, but a person standing still. "Be well," she said. "Be honest," I said. The door closed gently. The house held its breath and then exhaled. I climbed into the car and let the seat take some of the weight I had been refusing to acknowledge. The neighborhood rolled past in a slow strip of scenes. A child on a scooter dragging one foot. A man watering a patch of grass that refused to green. A mailbox leaning, uncorrected. At the airport, I moved through lines without noticing the signs. My hands, after the week, had learned what to do without orders. At the gate, I found a window seat and let the glass hold the view for me. The plane lifted. The city flattened to a map. The river wrote its wide sentence across the ground. The oak shrank to the idea of a shadow and then to a memory. In the pressurized quiet, I took out the notebook with its 3 clean pages and wrote on the first one, "A field the size of truth." I closed it without ornament. My life would not turn on pages. It would turn on steps. I slept a little, not because I was tired, but because my body understood what rest does to a voice. When I woke, the cabin lights were low and the woman 2 seats ahead was reading a paperback with a cracked spine. The cover showed an ocean and a cliff. She held it like a doorframe. We landed to the soft groan a plane makes when it forgives its own weight. My phone found the network and began to speak in gentle vibrations. One office had struck the complaint. Another had begun a review. A third asked for a meeting to discuss reform. I kept the messages and did not crown them with exclamation marks. Paperwork is not grace. It is the bridge we have to walk before we can reach it. Outside, the night air felt like rain that had not made up its mind. I pulled my bag over my shoulder and headed toward the base. The lights in the distance made a low constellation, man-made, stubborn, exact. I felt the old steadiness return, not as armor, but as balance. Home is not a house that knows your name. It is the work that recognizes your hands. The base greeted me with the comfort of routine. Gates, badges, the brief nod that belongs to people who have memorized each other's silhouettes. Concrete held its heat. Floodlights traced their dependable geometry across the ground. I felt the old cadence take my step and make it even again. Ruiz found me at the end of the corridor where the walls always smell faintly of oil and starch. He did not ask for a report. He tipped his head toward the classroom like a man pointing at a horizon and said, "They will listen." It was enough. The room filled in 2s and 3s. Young faces, careful spines, hands that wanted to be useful. I wrote 2 words on the board and let the chalk speak first. Field size. I told them you control it or it controls you. I told them that a speech is not always a shout. I told them that truth without process becomes performance, and process without truth becomes a maze. They took notes with a seriousness that made me want to be precise. A cadet in the second row raised his hand. "What did you do when the room would not make space?" he asked. I stood still until it had to rearrange itself, I said. I brought documents when a voice would have been mistaken for noise. I drew a map on paper because paper cannot blush. They laughed softly. The sound was kind. I added, also, I slept. Courage breaks when it is tired. After the session, one stayed behind. She waited until the others left and then said, "My mother writes the story of our house. I thought I had to leave to stop being a character. Maybe I just have to narrate." She smiled like a person who had finally found a tool in a drawer she had been opening for years. I told her to write it clean and keep copies somewhere she could not be asked to return them. Days knitted themselves into an ordinary I trusted. Dawn drills, briefings, the stubborn satisfaction of a checklist completed without theatrics. The forum segment began to show up in trainings across the region. Emails arrived from offices that used to be a rumor to me. One asked me to consult on a change to the intake policy for anonymous claims. Another asked for a sample of the language I had used when I said take only what you will use. It pleased me to see my sentences employed as tools rather than trophies. In the evenings, I ran the perimeter path and let the wind file the edges of thought. The body has its own method for editing. It moves until the words become simple enough to fit in a pocket. One night, my phone vibrated with Alexander's name. He wrote that he had taken meetings with an attorney, that he would be ending his marriage, that he had chosen to carry his lateness without asking others to hold a corner of it. He did not ask for praise. I replied with 2 words, be exact. Haley wrote less and wrote better. No ornaments, no self. She sent a photo of the letter she had submitted to each office. Signed, dated, clear. She included a single line at the end, "I will accept any reasonable consequence that restores trust to the process I injured." I read it twice and did not answer. Some sentences deserve silence so they can keep their shape. My mother chose tasks. She volunteered at the hall without being asked to be thanked. She sent receipts when requested. She stopped correcting centerpieces and started stacking chairs. We spoke rarely and without ceremony. Once she mailed me a clipping of a follow-up column from the Capitol that praised clarity over spectacle and underlined the part where the writer said public truth is not loud, it is steady. She circled steady. I kept the paper because it was the first time she had underlined something I agreed with. On a quiet Friday, Whitaker called and told me the hall had received a small grant to digitize records and make them harder to manipulate. "Paper remembers," he said. "Now it will also resist." He asked if he could dedicate the project to a sentence. The plaque would read a field the size of truth. I told him to add a period because periods are fences and people need them. Weeks later, I traveled back once, not for a fight, but for the kind of repair you can only do in person. The Veterans Hall had new lights and a small room with scanners lined up like patient mouths. Leela from the warehouse volunteered on weekends, feeding documents into the machine with the concentration of a conductor. She lifted her chin at me as if to say, "See, corners can be cleaned without setting the house on fire." I walked past the house before I left town. The oak held its shade, the hydrangeas kept their theater. The porch light was off in daylight, which felt like honesty. I did not go in. Some doors stay closed when you have finally learned how to stand outside them without shrinking. At the river, the Veterans Park was a long, patient breath. I sat on the bench under the maple and watched a boy teach his sister to skip stones. The stones flew low and startled a fish near the bank. The sister laughed as if the river had applauded her. I thought of the field, the ditch, the night that reassembled a life. I thought of the hall, the phones, the sentences that stopped pretending they were for show. I thought of the way a person can survive a blast and still be undone by a piece of paper, and of how a piece of paper can be the thing that brings the room back to true. Back on base, Ruiz gave me a stack of forms and a grin he pretended he did not have. "You have a class in an hour," he said. "Bring the small map." "I always do," I said. The cadets filed in with the quick steps of people who want to be worthy of the floor. I wrote 3 things on the board: evidence, process, mercy. I told them the first 2 you bring, the third you earn by the way you use the first 2. I told them mercy without the other 2 is sentiment, and that sentiment does not hold under weather. At the end, a hand rose. "What do we do when the person we love is the person who wrote the wrong sentence?" the cadet asked. "You write your right sentence anyway," I said. "You place it on a table where a room can see it. You do not read it on their behalf. You let them find their own voice or the silence that will have to stand for it." When the hour ended, I erased the board and watched the chalk fall like a soft, brief snow. Outside, the sky looked like clean paper. The runway lights waited for their night work. A cargo plane rolled past with a hum that sounded like persistence. In my quarters, I took the handkerchief from the inner pocket of the jacket and unfolded it. The sentence had begun to fade from the heat of the week, but the shape remained. I placed it on the desk beside the notebook and the small pin and the jar of jam with the crooked label. I looked at the stack and saw an altar that did not require prayer. It required use. My phone buzzed one last time before lights out. A brief message from a name I had stopped expecting. It read, "I am trying." It did not say at what. It did not need to. I wrote back, "Keep going," and set the phone face down. I turned off the lamp. Dark settled with its old exactness. The bass breathed. Somewhere far off, new recruits shouted the answers to questions they would not understand for years. I closed my eyes and rested my hand on the table's edge until I could feel the grain under my fingertips. It felt like a map a tree writes for anyone willing to read. When morning arrived, I would lace my boots and walk onto a field I had chosen. It would be the size of truth and not an inch wider. The rest of the world could be as loud as it wanted. I would be steady.